She was a princess who refused the hand of an emperor for her faith, and a queen who debated the greatest scientists of her age. History often strips royalty down to marble statues and gilded portraits, but you and I both know the truth behind the velvet. Every crown comes with a quiet toll, a subtle weight of loss woven into the daily routine. Let's explore. Honestly, you probably won't survive the sheer monotony of a 17th century royal curriculum, but you're welcome to try. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. I always love knowing exactly where you're resting tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto damp cobblestones beneath a sky the color of wet slate, the air carrying the faint metallic scent of rain on iron. It is the late 17th century, and you are walking through the enclosed courtyards of the Margravial Palace in Ansbach, where stone arches cast long, gentle shadows that stretch across manicured gravel paths. You can hear the rhythmic click of a wooden tutor's cane against the flagstones before you see him, a sound that echoes like a metronome keeping time with a heartbeat. This is where it all begins, in a place where time doesn't rush but rather pools, settles and moves forward in measured breaths. Caroline is barely 4 years old, though in your mind's eye you're watching her grow through you. You feel the heavy wool of her early riding coat settle on your own shoulders, the rough weave scratching lightly at the nape of your neck as you learn that comfort in this world is always secondary to structure. The courtyard gates close with a soft thud behind you, sealing off the outside world, and you are guided inside by a line of attendants whose footsteps never hurry. Everything here is scheduled, down to the minute the firewood is added to the hearth, down to the hour the chapel bells ring out across the Franconian plains. You are taught early that discipline is not a punishment. It is a lullaby that keeps the chaos at bay. Your mornings begin before the sun fully breaches the horizon. You sit at a low oak desk, the wood smoothed by decades of restless princely hands, and watch as a French tutor spreads a sheet of handmade paper across the surface. The paper feels thick, slightly rough, and smells faintly of vinegar and dried herbs. You are handed a goose quill, and you learn the slow art of calligraphy. Each letter is formed with deliberate strokes, the ink pooling just before you pull it away from the page. You trace the alphabet until your fingers ache, repeating the same shapes until they become muscle memory. Latin follows, then Greek, then mathematics, and the numbers are spoken aloud in a steady, rhythmic cadence that you find strangely soothing. Addition and subtraction are recited like poetry. Geometry is drawn with compasses and wooden rulers, and the quiet scratching of the pen becomes the soundtrack to your awakening. You memorize psalms, not to perform piety for a court, but to anchor yourself in something predictable. The tutors speak softly, their voices measured, never raising above a conversational hum. You are never rushed. Rushing is considered vulgar here, and so you breathe in time with the ticking of the brass wall clock, letting each syllable settle into your mind before the next arrives. Afternoons bring the gentle transition from the written word to the physical. You are led into a wide, airy room where sunlight filters through tall, leaded windows, casting geometric patterns across the floorboards. Here, you practice posture. You stand against the wall, heels together, shoulders rolled back, a heavy book balanced atop your head. You do not move. You learn to breathe without letting your chest rise too quickly, to let your spine lengthen until it feels like a taut but relaxed string. The governess circles you slowly, adjusting the angle of your chin with the back of her knuckles, her touch cool and clinical. You are taught to walk without making a sound, to glide across rooms with your gaze fixed on the middle distance, to receive visitors with a slight incline of the neck that conveys respect without submission. It is exhausting, yet deeply calming, because you know exactly what is expected of you. There is no guessing. There is no sudden shifts in mood from unpredictable elders. There is only the rhythm. When you tire, you are allowed to rest on a velvet cushion near the window, where you watch servants carry baskets of linens through the garden paths below. They move with the same unhurried grace. You realize that this is how royalty maintains control, not through force, but through predictability. Every gesture is rehearsed. Every word is weighed. You learn to speak only when necessary, and when you do, you are corrected gently if your tone wavers. Evenings are reserved for theology and history, though here they are not treated as separate subjects, but as intertwined threads. You listen to accounts of Protestant reformers, their lives mapped out with careful neutrality, stripped of theatrical martyrdom, and presented as quiet endurance. You hear about the 30 Years' War not as a sweeping drama of clashing swords, but as a series of broken treaties, displaced families, and the slow rebuilding of trust. The chaplain speaks in a low, resonant voice, his words wrapping around you like a heavy quilt. You feel the weight of faith in this household, not as a roaring fire, but as a banked hearth, warm, consistent, and carefully maintained. You learn that conviction is not declared, it is demonstrated through daily restraint. You memorize dates and lineage, tracing the fragile branches of German princely houses, understanding early on that your bloodline is a tapestry, woven from fragile alliances and careful marriages. You do not feel trapped by this. Instead, you find comfort in the lines. They give you shape. They tell you where you fit in a world that is otherwise vast and indifferent. There is a quirky detail your tutor slips into the curriculum, almost as an afterthought, that catches your attention during the late afternoon study. You are taught that in certain northern German households, young princesses were instructed to practice arithmetic by counting dried lavender buds dropped one by one onto a wooden tray. The soft thud of each herb against the grain was supposed to train the ear to recognize numerical rhythm alongside the mind. You try it yourself, letting the tiny purple flowers fall from your fingertips, listening to the gentle percussion as you count backward from 30. It feels silly at first, until the repetition takes over, and you realize it's working. Your breathing slows, your thoughts untangle, the numbers stop being abstract symbols and become physical sensations. You smile faintly, though you quickly school your face into neutrality, remembering that overt joy in the study room is considered a lapse in decorum. Still, you pocket the quiet satisfaction. You will remember lavender. You will remember the sound of things falling into place. As the weeks turn into months, you notice how the seasons shift outside the palace walls without ever disrupting the internal schedule. Frost creeps along the window panes in delicate fractals, and the hearth burns steadily. Spring brings damp earth and the scent of budding lilacs through open shutters, yet your lessons continue unchanged. You begin to anticipate the rhythm so thoroughly that you no longer need to look at the clock. Your body knows when to turn the page, when to stand, when to rest. You are learning to live inside a metronome, and it is strangely restful. Historians still argue whether the intense rigidity of Caroline's early education in Ansbach forged her renowned political patience, or if it was merely a temporary scaffold that she dismantled once she found her own intellectual footing. You sit in that quiet debate, feeling the truth somewhere in the middle. You know that the structure gave you language, but it also taught you how to wait, how to observe, how to hold your thoughts until the right moment to release them. You trace the edge of your notebook with your thumb, the paper warm from your grip, and you feel a deep settling calm spread through your ribs. The courtyard bells ring. You close the book, you stand. You prepare for tomorrow, which will look exactly like today, and that is entirely the point. You feel the carriage wheels shift from cobblestone to packed earth, the motion becoming softer, more rhythmic, like a cradle rocking on a gentle tide. The air changes as you leave Ansbach behind. It carries less wood smoke now, more the crisp, mineral scent of northern plains. You are travelling to Berlin, to the court of your godmother, Sophia Charlotte, and though you do not yet know it, this journey will recalibrate the very way you think. The road unfurls before you in long, unbroken stretches, bordered by fields of rye that sway in synchronized waves under a wide, pale sky. Inside the carriage, the upholstery is worn but clean, the leather smelling faintly of beeswax and thyme. You rest your head against the squab and watch the world pass in a slow, panoramic blur. There is no rush to arrive. The journey itself is part of the education. You learn to read the landscape by its shadows, to gauge the hour by the angle of sunlight through the window, to let your thoughts drift like clouds without the pressure to pin them down. This is your first lesson in transition. That change need not be abrupt to be profound. When you finally approach Berlin, the city reveals itself gradually. First, the distant spire of the Stadtschloss catches the afternoon light, glinting like a polished needle against the horizon. Then the orderly rows of lime trees lining the avenues come into view, their leaves whispering secrets to one another in the breeze. You are greeted not with fanfare, but with a quiet efficiency that feels like a handshake rather than a proclamation. Sophia Charlotte's court is different from Ansbach, not louder but deeper. The conversations here do not shout, they simmer. You are introduced to a room where the air itself seems thick with ideas, where the scratch of a quill is punctuated by the soft clink of porcelain teacups and the low murmur of voices debating everything from astronomy to ethics. You feel your mind stretch, not from strain, but from the gentle expansion of being allowed to wonder aloud. Sophia Charlotte herself moved through these gatherings with a calm authority, her presence like a steady candle in a room full of flickering lanterns. She does not dominate the discussion, she curates it, and she watches you, not with expectation, but with quiet invitation. Your days in Berlin settle into a new rhythm, one that honors structure but leaves room for curiosity. Mornings still begin with lessons, but now they include subjects you never encountered in Ansbach: natural philosophy, the principles of optics, the poetry of ancient Rome read not just for language but for meaning. You sit in a sunlit salon with a small group of scholars, and you are encouraged to ask questions, not to recite answers, but to ponder. You learn that it is acceptable to say, "I do not yet understand," and that those 4 words can open a door rather than close one. The debates are never heated, they are exploratory, like walking through a garden where each path reveals a new perspective. You listen to discussions about the nature of light, about whether the universe is governed by mathematical harmony or divine whim, and you feel your own thoughts beginning to form patterns, connections you hadn't noticed before. It is intellectual gardening, and you are both the gardener and the soil. One afternoon you are invited to observe a demonstration in the palace's small laboratory. A visiting natural philosopher sets up a simple apparatus, a prism, a beam of sunlight directed through a shuttered window, and a white screen. You watch, breath held, as the light fractures into a spectrum of colours, painting the screen with a silent rainbow. The room is utterly still. No one speaks. You feel the weight of the moment, not as drama, but as discovery. You realize that understanding can be a quiet thing, a personal revelation that doesn't need applause. Later, over a light supper of broth and dark bread, you mention the experiment to Sophia Charlotte. She smiles, not with pride but with recognition. "Curiosity," she says softly, "is the most polite form of rebellion." You tuck those words away, feeling their warmth like a stone kept in your pocket. There is a quirky detail you notice during your time in Berlin, one that seems trivial but lingers in your memory. In the palace library, there is a particular armchair upholstered in faded blue velvet, positioned near a window that overlooks the garden. It is said that Sophia Charlotte reserved this chair for guests who asked especially thoughtful questions. The chair is not ornate. In fact, one of its legs is slightly shorter than the others, so it rocks ever so gently when you shift your weight. You are invited to sit in it once after you pose a question about the relationship between faith and reason that leaves the room in comfortable silence. As you settle into the chair, you feel its subtle imbalance, the way it encourages micro-adjustments to stay upright. It feels like a metaphor you don't need to dissect. You simply enjoy the gentle motion, the way it mirrors the careful balancing act of holding multiple truths at once. You make a mental note. Wisdom sometimes sits in a wobbly chair. Your evenings in Berlin often end with music. Not the grand ceremonial compositions of court, but smaller pieces, lute songs, simple harpsichord melodies that seem to weave through the conversation rather than interrupt it. You learn to appreciate the spaces between notes, the pauses that allow a thought to resonate before the next one begins. You find yourself humming a particular minuet under your breath as you prepare for bed, its rhythm syncing with your heartbeat. You realize that intellectual life at its best is not a sprint but a dance. It requires timing, listening, and the willingness to follow as well as lead. You begin to keep a small journal not of events, but of questions. What is the nature of curiosity? How does one cultivate patience in inquiry? Is there a difference between knowing and understanding? You write in neat, careful script, the ink drying slowly in the lamplight. The act of writing becomes a form of meditation, a way to slow your thoughts enough to examine them without judgment. Historians still argue whether Sophia Charlotte's influence on Caroline was primarily intellectual or emotional, whether she provided the tools for thought or the confidence to use them. You sit with that question as you walk through the palace gardens at dusk, the gravel crunching softly under your shoes. You feel both. You feel the gift of method, the habit of breaking down complex ideas into manageable parts, and you feel the gift of permission, the assurance that your mind is worthy of attention. You pause by a fountain where water trickles in a steady, soothing rhythm, and you watch the last of the sunlight gild the edges of the leaves. You understand, in a way that doesn't need words, that education is not about filling a vessel but about kindling a flame. And kindling requires both fuel and air, structure and space. As your time in Berlin draws to a close, you feel a subtle shift within yourself. You are not the same person who arrived. You have not been transformed by drama or crisis, but by accumulation, by countless small moments of listening, questioning and reflecting. You pack your belongings with the same care you applied to your studies, folding each garment neatly, placing your journal in a protective sleeve. You say your farewells without tears, but with a deep, quiet gratitude that feels like a promise. Sophia Charlotte embraces you, and you feel the slight pressure of her hand on your shoulder, a gesture that says more than any speech could. You climb back into the carriage, the wheels beginning their slow rotation once more. The road back to Ansbach feels familiar yet new. You look out the window at the passing landscape, and you see it with different eyes, not just as scenery, but as a text to be read, a system to be understood. You carry Berlin with you, not as a memory, but as a method. And as the carriage rocks gently forward, you let your eyelids grow heavy, the rhythm of the wheels lulling you into a restful contemplation of all you have learned, and all you have yet to discover. You return to Ansbach with a mind that feels both fuller and lighter, as if you've been given a new lens through which to view the world. The familiar courtyards welcome you back, but you notice them differently now. The way the afternoon light slants across the flagstone, the precise angle of the ivy climbing the western wall, the subtle variation in the chapel bell's tone on different days of the week. You observe it all with a quiet attentiveness that wasn't there before. You continue your studies, but now you read between the lines. You ask questions that don't have easy answers. You sit with uncertainty without rushing to resolve it. This is the gift Berlin gave you. Not knowledge, but the capacity to hold complexity. And it is this capacity that will soon be tested in the most personal way imaginable. The proposal arrives not with a trumpet blast, but with the soft rustle of parchment and the careful sealing of wax. You are still in your teens, and the future Holy Roman Emperor, Charles VI, Archduke of Austria, has expressed interest in your hand. It is, by any conventional measure, an extraordinary opportunity. To become empress would place you at the very apex of European power, surrounded by the splendor of Vienna, influential in matters of war and peace, faith and culture. The courtiers who bring the news speak in hushed, reverent tones, their eyes bright with the magnitude of the possibility. They lay out the advantages with the precision of accountants, the titles, the lands, the political leverage, the legacy. You listen politely, your hands folded in your lap, your expression neutral. Inside, however, you are not calculating. You are considering. You ask for time, not days but weeks. You retreat to your private study, the one with the window that overlooks the herb garden, where the scent of rosemary and thyme drifts in on warm afternoons. You sit at your desk, the same oak surface where you once practiced your calligraphy, and you let your thoughts unfold without pressure. You weigh the proposal not as a princess, but as a person. You consider what you believe, not what you are expected to believe. You are a Protestant, raised in a household where faith was a quiet, steady conviction rather than a performative display. To marry Charles would require your conversion to Catholicism. It would mean renouncing the theological framework that has shaped your understanding of the world, of morality, of your own place within the divine order. You do not feel dramatic outrage at this prospect. You feel a calm, deep certainty that this is not the path for you. The decision, when it comes, is not made in a moment of fiery defiance. It is reached through a series of quiet mornings spent in reflection, of evenings walking the garden paths as the stars begin to appear. You write a letter, not to the Archduke himself, but to a trusted intermediary. Your script is steady, your language precise, your tone respectful but unwavering. You express your gratitude for the honour, your admiration for the Habsburg house, and your inability in good conscience to alter the faith that anchors your soul. You do not apologise. You do not embellish. You simply state your truth as clearly and kindly as you know how. When the letter is sent, you feel no surge of triumph, no anxiety about consequence. You feel a profound sense of alignment, as if you have finally synchronized your outer life with your inner compass. You return to your routine, but now it feels chosen, not merely accepted. There is a quirky detail that surfaces in the aftermath of your refusal, one that court gossips whisper about but never commit to paper. It is said that on the morning you sent your letter, you requested a simple breakfast of black bread and apple cider, and that you ate it while watching a pair of sparrows build a nest in the eaves outside your window. You observed their methodical weaving, their gentle persistence, their refusal to be rushed by the grander movements of the human world below. When a servant later asked if you were distressed, you reportedly smiled and said, "I am merely learning from architects who know that a home must be built on a foundation that will hold." The story may be apocryphal, but it feels true to those who know you. You have always understood that strength often looks like stillness. That conviction can be as quiet as a bird's song at dawn. Your refusal does not cause a scandal, not in the way modern minds might expect. The courts of Europe are accustomed to political marriages, but they are also accustomed to the delicate diplomacy of polite decline. Your letter is received with formal disappointment, but also with a grudging respect. You have not insulted, you have simply chosen. And in an age where choice, especially for a woman, is often an illusion, your calm assertion of agency registers as a subtle but significant act. You return to your studies, your correspondence, your quiet observations. You do not dwell on the path not taken. You focus on the one before you, trusting that it will reveal itself if in time. And it does. Not long after, another possibility emerges, not from Vienna, but from London. George Augustus, the Elector of Hanover and heir to the British throne, is proposed as a match. The political calculus is different here. Britain is a constitutional monarchy, Protestant by law and by sentiment, and the Hanoverian succession is still fresh, still needing consolidation. You learn about George through letters and reports. He is described as steady, if not brilliant, loyal, if not poetic. You do not feel a spark of romantic destiny, but you feel something perhaps more durable, a sense of compatibility. You begin a correspondence with him, not of flowery declarations, but of practical matters, of shared interests, of mutual respect. You discuss governance, education, the challenges of ruling in an age of changing expectations. You find that you can be yourself in these letters, thoughtful, inquisitive, principled, without fear of misunderstanding. The courtship, such as it is, unfolds at a pace that feels natural, unhurried. You are not being swept away. You are walking alongside. Historians still argue whether Caroline's refusal of Charles VI was primarily an act of religious conviction or a shrewd political calculation, that by declining the Habsburg match, she positioned herself more favourably for the Hanoverian alliance that would eventually place her on the British throne. You sit with that debate as you prepare for your new life, packing your belongings with the same care you applied to your studies. You know that motives are rarely pure, that decisions are often layered with both principle and pragmatism. You do not feel the need to disentangle them. You simply know that you chose a path that allowed you to remain true to your faith while also embracing a future where your mind could continue to grow. You board the carriage that will take you to the coast, to the ship that will carry you across the North Sea to Britain. You look back once at Ansbach, at the courtyards where you learned rhythm, at the windows where you learned to wander. You feel gratitude, not nostalgia. You are not leaving your past behind. You are carrying it forward, like a well-worn book whose pages you know by heart. As the carriage rolls forward, the landscape begins to change. The familiar hills of Franconia give way to broader plains, the air taking on a cooler, salt-tinged edge as you approach the coast. You rest your head against the squab, and let the motion of the wheels lull you into a gentle reverie. You think about the quiet courage it takes to say no when the world expects yes. You think about the even quieter courage it takes to say yes when the choice is your own. You feel the weight of your decisions settle around you like a familiar cloak, not heavy but reassuring. You have chosen faith over empire, partnership over pomp, and in doing so, you have set the stage for a life that will be defined not by the titles you hold, but by the mind you cultivate. The road ahead is long, the sea crossing will be slow, and London will be bustling and strange. But you are ready. You have learned to move at the pace of principle, to think at the speed of reflection, and to trust that the right path often reveals itself not in a flash of lightning, but in the steady, gentle light of dawn. You stand on the wooden dock at Cuxhaven, the North Sea breeze carrying the sharp, briny scent of salt and seaweed, mingling with the faint, oily smell of tar from the ships moored nearby. The sky is a vast, shifting canvas of grey and pearl, the clouds moving in slow, deliberate formations that seem to mirror the rhythm of your own breathing. Before you lies the vessel that will carry you to Britain, a sturdy three-masted yacht, its sails furled, its hull painted a deep, weathered green. You feel the gentle rock of the tide beneath your feet, a subtle sway that invites you to surrender to the motion, rather than resist it. This is the beginning of your voyage, and like everything in your life now, it will unfold at a pace that honours patience. You board with a small retinue, attendants, a lady-in-waiting, a personal physician, all moving with the quiet efficiency of people accustomed to travel. The cabin assigned to you is modest but comfortable, a narrow berth with crisp linen sheets, a small desk secured to the wall, a porthole that frames a circular view of the harbour. You settle your belongings with care, folding your garments into the wooden chest, placing your journal and a few treasured books within easy reach. The ship's bell rings, a clear, resonant note that cuts through the ambient murmur of the dock. Lines are cast off, the sails begin to unfurl with a soft, rhythmic flutter, catching the breeze like a slow, deep inhale. You feel the vessel lurch gently forward, then settle into a steady glide as it leaves the harbour behind. The sea crossing is not a drama of storms and peril, but a meditation on motion. You spend your days on the quarterdeck, wrapped in a woolen cloak against the chill, watching the horizon stretch and shift. The water is a living thing, sometimes calm and glassy, reflecting the sky like a mirror, sometimes rippled with gentle waves that catch the light in fleeting silver patterns. You learn the language of the sea, the way the wind changes direction with a subtle shift in pressure, the sound of the rigging humming in a steady breeze, the distant cry of gulls that follow the ship for a time before veering away. You keep a log, not of events, but of sensations. The taste of salt on your lips, the feel of the sun warming one side of your face while the other remains cool, the sound of the crew moving about their duties with a quiet, practiced competence. You are not a passenger so much as a participant in a slow, ancient ritual of travel. Meals are taken in the captain's cabin, a small wood-panelled room that smells of beeswax and dried citrus. The food is simple but nourishing. Salted beef, hardtack softened in broth, stewed apples, a thin beer that tastes faintly of yeast and grain. You eat slowly, savouring each bite, listening to the low conversation of your companions. There is no rush to finish, no pressure to perform. The rhythm of the voyage encourages a kind of mindful presence. You find yourself noticing details you might otherwise overlook. The grain of the wooden table, the way the light shifts through the porthole as the day progresses, the gentle creak of the ship's timbers as it responds to the sea. You begin to understand that travel, at its best, is not about reaching a destination, but about allowing the journey to reshape your perception. There is a quirky detail you observe during the crossing, one that becomes a small private ritual. Each evening, just before dusk, the ship's cook would prepare a pot of spiced cider, warming it slowly over a low flame with cinnamon sticks, cloves, and a twist of orange peel. The aroma would drift through the cabin, rich and comforting, and you would be offered a small cup to hold in your hands as the sun dipped below the horizon. You learned to sip it slowly, letting the warmth spread from your palms to your chest, watching the sky change from gold to rose to deep indigo. It became a moment of transition, a gentle marker between day and night. You later discovered that this practice was not standard naval procedure, but a personal tradition of the cook, who believed that a warm drink at twilight helped the soul adjust to the disorientation of travel. You appreciated the sentiment. You still think of it sometimes, the quiet comfort of a spiced cider held in cupped hands as the world softens into evening. As the days pass, the coastline of Britain begins to appear on the horizon, a low, green line that gradually resolves into cliffs, then beaches, then the distant smoke of settlements. The approach to London is not a sudden arrival, but a gradual unfolding. You sail up the Thames estuary, the water growing calmer, the air taking on the earthy scent of river mud and marsh grass. The riverbanks are dotted with small villages, their thatched roofs and church spires rising from the landscape like gentle punctuation. You pass fishing boats with nets draped over their sides, their crews waving with casual familiarity. The pace slows as you navigate the river's bends, the ship's draft requiring careful piloting through shallower waters. You stand at the rail, watching the world come closer, feeling the subtle shift from the open sea to the inhabited river. London reveals itself in layers. First, the distant silhouette of the city's skyline, St. Paul's Cathedral dome rising like a gentle hill against the sky, the clustered spires of churches, the forest of masts in the Pool of London. Then the sounds begin to reach you. The call of watermen hawking their services, the clatter of carts on cobbled quays, the distant murmur of a city that never truly sleeps. The ship docks at Whitehall Stairs, and you are greeted by a delegation of courtiers and officials, their attire a mix of formal ceremony and practical adaptation to the river's damp. You disembark with the same quiet dignity you have cultivated, your footsteps steady on the wooden gangplank. The air here is different, thicker, carrying the smells of wood smoke, baking bread, horse dung, and the faint metallic tang of the river. It is bustling, yes, but not chaotic. There is a rhythm to it, a complex polyphonic hum that you find yourself beginning to pass. You are escorted through the streets to Leicester House, your new residence. The journey through London is a slow procession, not for spectacle but for acclamation. You observe the city from the carriage window, the narrow winding streets, the timber-framed buildings leaning companionably toward one another, the markets overflowing with produce and textiles, the faces of people from all walks of life. You notice the way the light filters through the coal smoke haze, casting everything in a soft, diffused glow. You hear the cadence of English speech, different from the German you grew up with, melodic in its own way. You feel the vibration of the carriage wheels on cobblestones, a steady, grounding rhythm. You are not overwhelmed, you are absorbing. You have been trained for this, not for the specifics of London, but for the art of entering a new environment with observation rather than reaction. Historians still argue whether Caroline's calm demeanour upon arriving in London was a genuine reflection of her temperament or a carefully cultivated performance designed to reassure a nation still adjusting to the Hanoverian succession. You sit with that question as you step into Leicester House for the first time, feeling the cool, quiet air of the interior after the bustling street. The house is elegant but not ostentatious, with rooms that feel lived in rather than staged. You are shown to your chambers, where a fire crackles softly in the hearth and fresh linens await on the bed. You sit for a moment on the edge of the mattress, feeling the slight give of the feathers beneath you. You are here. You have arrived, not with fanfare, but with a quiet certainty that feels like the natural conclusion to a long, deliberate journey. You unpack a few personal items, arrange your journal on the desk, and look out the window at the garden below. The light is beginning to soften, the day drawing to a close. You feel tired but not weary. You feel ready but not eager. You feel simply present. And as the first stars begin to appear in the London sky, you allow yourself a moment of stillness, letting the rhythm of your new life begin to settle around you like a familiar, comforting weight. You settle into the rhythm of Leicester House as the London seasons begin to turn. The air growing crisper, the days shorter, the light taking on that particular golden quality that only an English autumn can produce. The house itself becomes familiar. The creak of the third stair on the main staircase, the way the afternoon sun slants through the library window to illuminate dust motes dancing in lazy spirals, the soft murmur of servants moving through corridors with practiced silence. But it is the evenings that begin to hold a special anticipation. You have heard whispers, not of gossip, but of possibility. Leicester House, under your guidance, is becoming known for something different. Not for lavish balls or political manoeuvring, but for conversation, for the quiet, steady exchange of ideas. You prepare for these gatherings with the same care you apply to your morning toilette, but with a different intention. You choose attire that is elegant but not distracting. A gown of deep blue silk that catches the candlelight without shimmering excessively. Pearls at your ears that add a touch of refinement without demanding attention. You arrange the salon with deliberate simplicity. Chairs positioned to encourage small clusters of conversation, a low fire crackling in the hearth to take the edge off the evening chill, trays of light refreshments placed unobtrusively along the sideboards, small cakes, dried fruits, glasses of elderflower cordial diluted with water. The goal is not to impress, but to facilitate. You want your guests to forget the formality of court and remember the pleasure of thinking together. They begin to arrive as dusk settles, not in a rush, but in a gentle trickle. First, the mathematician, his fingers still faintly stained with ink, carrying a small notebook filled with equations he is eager to discuss. Then the natural philosopher, who smells faintly of the laboratory, of herbs, of metals, of the earthy scent of experimentation. A poet follows, her eyes bright with observation, her words chosen with the precision of someone who understands the weight of language. You greet each one with a quiet word, a nod of recognition, a gesture toward the fire or a comfortable chair. There is no formal introduction ceremony, no announced entrance. You have cultivated an atmosphere where intellect is welcomed without ceremony, where curiosity is its own credential. The conversation begins softly, almost tentatively, like the first notes of a melody finding its harmony. You do not lead so much as you nurture. You pose a question not to test, but to open. What do you make of the recent observations of Jupiter's moons? Or how might we reconcile the new theories of motion with our understanding of divine order? The room responds not with debate, but with exploration. Voices rise and fall in a gentle cadence, ideas passed between guests like delicate objects to be examined from all angles. You listen more than you speak, your attention focused, your expression encouraging. When you do contribute, it is to clarify, to connect, to gently steer the discussion back from abstraction to application. You have learned that the best conversations are not won, but woven. There is a particular evening that stays with you, one that exemplifies the unique character of these gatherings. A visiting astronomer has brought a small, portable telescope, not the grand instrument of an observatory, but a modest device that can be set up on a table by the window. After dinner, he invites the group to observe the moon, which hangs full and luminous in the clear night sky. One by one, your guests step to the window, peer through the lens and fall silent. You watch their faces as they see the craters, the mountains, the shadows that give the lunar surface its textured reality. There is no exclamatory drama, no theatrical awe. Instead, there is a shared quiet wonder, a collective recognition of the vastness of creation and the human capacity to comprehend even a fraction of it. When the telescope returns to its stand, the conversation resumes, but it has shifted. The questions are softer, more reflective. You feel the room breathe differently, as if the act of looking together has created a subtle bond of humility and curiosity. There is a quirky detail you notice about these salons, one that becomes a fond, private observation. You have a particular teacup, a delicate piece of porcelain painted with forget-me-nots, that you always use when hosting. It is not the finest in your collection, nor the most ornate, but it has a slightly imperfect a tiny chip that you can feel with your thumb when you hold it. You have come to appreciate this flaw. It reminds you that perfection is not the goal, presence is. On one occasion, a guest remarked on the cup, not with criticism, but with appreciation. It has character, they said, and you realized that this was the spirit you hoped to cultivate in your gatherings. Not flawless performance, but authentic engagement. You began to leave the cup in plain sight on the sideboard, a small silent invitation to embrace the beautiful imperfection of human inquiry. The discussions range widely, as your interests do. You talk about the new experiments with electricity, about the philosophical implications of Locke's theories of mind, about the poetry of Milton read not just for its language but for its moral complexity. You encourage your guests to draw connections between disciplines, to see how a scientific observation might illuminate a theological question, or how a poetic image might clarify a political principle. You find that the most fruitful moments often come not from certainty, but from the comfortable admission of not knowing. I have not yet considered that angle, you might say, or help me understand how that principle might apply in practice. These phrases are not signs of weakness. They are invitations to collaborate. You have created a space where intelligence is not a weapon, but a tool for mutual discovery. Historians still argue whether Caroline's Leicester House salons were genuinely influential in shaping early Enlightenment thought in Britain, or whether they were primarily social performances that enhanced her reputation as a learned princess without substantially advancing intellectual discourse. You sit with that debate as you move through these evenings, feeling the truth somewhere in the experience itself. You know that influence is not always measurable in publications or policies. Sometimes it is subtler. A young scholar leaves your salon with a new question to pursue. A seasoned thinker finds their idea refined by a gentle challenge. A connection is made between two minds that might otherwise never have met. You do not need to quantify the impact. You feel it in the quality of the silence that follows a particularly insightful remark, in the way a guest's eyes light up when a concept clicks into place, in the quiet gratitude expressed as they depart into the London night. As the evenings draw to a close, you do not rush the conclusion. You allow the conversation to wind down naturally, like a melody resolving to its final note. You might offer a final reflection, not to summarize, but to honor the exchange. "Thank you for helping me see this differently," you might say. Or, "I look forward to continuing this thought another time." Your guests leave not with a sense of having performed, but with a sense of having participated. You stand at the door as they depart, offering a quiet word to each, watching as they step into the cool night air, their minds perhaps a little fuller, their spirits a little lighter. You close the door softly behind the last guest and stand for a moment in the quiet salon. The fire has burned down to embers, casting a warm, flickering light across the room. The air still holds the faint scent of beeswax candles and dried lavender from the refreshment tray. You feel a deep, settling satisfaction, not the exhilaration of triumph, but the calm contentment of a day well spent in the company of curious minds. You extinguish the final candle and make your way to your chamber, the house settling into its nighttime rhythm around you. The corridors are quiet, the servants have retired, and the only sound is the distant murmur of the city beyond the garden walls. You prepare for bed with the same deliberate care you apply to all your rituals, but your mind is not racing with the day's events. Instead, it is gently reviewing the conversations, not to analyze, but to appreciate. You think about the questions that were asked, the connections that were made, the quiet moments of understanding that passed between people who might otherwise have remained strangers. You slip beneath the linen sheets, feeling their cool smoothness against your skin, and you let your thoughts drift like the embers in the hearth below, glowing but not demanding. You have created a space where ideas can breathe, where intellect can be both rigorous and kind, and in doing so, you have found a way to make learning feel like coming home. As sleep begins to gather at the edges of your consciousness, you feel a profound sense of peace, knowing that tomorrow evening, the salon will welcome new minds, new questions, and the same quiet, steady light of curiosity that guides you still. You wake before the nursery staff, as you often do, the quiet hours of dawn belonging to you alone. The house is still, the only sound the distant chirp of sparrows in the garden and the soft hiss of the banked fire in your chamber. You rise, dress in a simple morning gown, and make your way to the children's wing. This is your time, not for ceremony, not for politics, but for the quiet, repetitive rhythm of motherhood. You push open the heavy oak door to the nursery and are greeted by the warm, milky scent of sleeping children, the soft rustle of linen, the gentle rise and fall of small chests beneath embroidered blankets. You move among them with practiced silence, adjusting a coverlet here, smoothing a pillow there, your touch light but certain. You do not wake them yet. You simply observe, taking inventory not just of their health but of their peace. The routine you have established for your children is strict, but not unkind. It is repetitive, but not monotonous. You believe that structure is a form of love, that knowing what comes next allows a child to feel safe enough to grow. Breakfast is served at precisely 7 o'clock, not a minute earlier or later. The menu is simple and consistent. Warm milk, a slice of buttered bread, a small portion of stewed fruit. The children sit at a low table, their posture corrected gently but firmly, their manners reinforced with quiet reminders. Chew slowly, you murmur. Napkins in your lap. We speak in indoor voices. There is no shouting, no frustration. Your tone is steady, like the ticking of a well-made clock. The servants who assist know the routine as well as you do. They move with the same unhurried precision, anticipating needs before they are voiced. After breakfast comes lessons, tailored to each child's age and ability. The eldest begin with Latin and French, the younger with letters and numbers. You sit with them sometime, not to instruct. That is the tutor's role, but to observe, to encourage, to model the attentiveness you expect from them. You listen to them recite, your expression neutral but attentive, offering a small nod when they succeed, a gentle correction when they stumble. You have learned that children, like adults, respond better to calm consistency than to dramatic praise or punishment. A mistake is not a failure, it is an opportunity to try again. You repeat this mantra to yourself as much as to them. The schoolroom is a place of order. Books arranged by size on the shelves, inkwells filled to the same level, quills trimmed and ready. Even the light is regulated, shutters adjusted to allow enough sun for reading without glare. You have created an environment where learning can happen without distraction, where the mind can focus because the body knows what to expect. There is a quirky detail you have incorporated into the children's routine, one that seems trivial but brings you quiet joy. Each afternoon after their lessons and before their outdoor time, you lead them in what you call the minute of stillness. You gather them in a circle on the nursery rug, and you ask them to close their eyes and listen. Not to you, not to each other, but to the world around them. What do you hear? You ask softly. At first they fidget, they giggle, they open one eye to peek, but gradually they learn. They hear the distant chime of a church bell, the rustle of leaves in the garden, the soft scratch of a pen from your study down the hall. You teach them that silence is not empty. It is full of subtle sounds waiting to be noticed. You later discover that this practice was inspired by a German folk tradition you heard about as a child, where families would pause at midday to listen to the house breathe. You appreciate the poetry of it. You find that after the minute of stillness, the children are calmer, more focused, more present. You keep the practice not because it is fashionable, but because it works. The afternoons are for play, but even play has its structure. You believe that recreation should refresh, not exhaust. The children are allowed to run in the garden, but within defined boundaries. They may climb the low branches of the apple tree, but not too high. They can dig in the designated patch of earth, but they must wash their hands thoroughly afterward. You join them sometimes, not as a playmate, but as a gentle supervisor, your presence a quiet anchor in their energetic world. You watch them chase butterflies, build towers of pebbles, invent games with rules that shift with their imaginations. You do not intervene unless necessary. You have learned that children need space to discover their own rhythms, just as adults do. But you are always nearby, a steady presence they can return to if the world becomes too much. Evenings are for winding down. Supper is early, light, and eaten in the family dining room, not the formal state apartments. The conversation is encouraged but guided. You ask about their day. You listen to their small triumphs and frustrations. You offer perspective without dismissing their feelings. After supper comes bath time, a ritual of warm water, lavender-scented soap and soft towels. You sometimes assist the nursemaids, your hands gentle as you wash small backs, braid damp hair, apply a dab of rosewater to soothe the skin. The children are drowsy by this point, their energy spent, their minds settling. You read to them before bed, not thrilling tales of adventure, but calming stories of kindness, of patience, of the quiet heroes who changed the world through steady effort. Your voice is low, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. You watch their eyelids grow heavy, their breathing deepen, and you feel a profound sense of fulfillment that has nothing to do with titles or power. But the royal family is not always a calm harbour. The turbulence you navigate is not of your making, but it affects your children nonetheless. There are tensions between your husband and his father, political disagreements that spill into personal resentment. There are court factions vying for influence, whispers that travel faster than truth. There are public expectations that press upon your family like a weight. You shield your children as much as you can, but you cannot seal them off entirely. So you teach them resilience through routine. When the household is unsettled, you double down on the familiar, the same meal times, the same lessons, the same bedtime stories. You explain changes honestly but simply, without dramatizing. Grandfather is upset today, so we will speak softly, you might say. There is a disagreement in the court, but our home remains a place of peace. You model calm in the face of chaos, not by pretending everything is fine, but by demonstrating that stability can be chosen, moment by moment. Historians still argue whether Caroline's strict parenting routines were a response to the instability of her own childhood, or a deliberate strategy to prepare her children for the unique pressures of royal life in a constitutional monarchy. You sit with that question as you tuck your youngest into bed, smoothing the blanket over their shoulders, kissing their forehead with a tenderness that feels both personal and political. You know that motherhood in the public eye is a performance as much as a practice. Every gesture is observed, every decision scrutinized. But you also know that your children need more than a symbol. They need a mother. So you give them both, the public dignity they will one day inherit, and the private consistency they need to grow. You do not expect them to be perfect. You expect them to be prepared for duty, for disappointment, for the quiet courage it takes to lead a life that is never entirely your own. As the house settles into night, you make your final rounds. You check that the nursery fire is banked safely, that the windows are latched against the chill, that the night nurse is awake and attentive. You pause in the doorway for a moment, listening to the soft, even breaths of your sleeping children. You feel the weight of your responsibility, not as a burden, but as a privilege. You have created a space where they can be both royal and human, where they can learn to rule without losing their capacity to feel. You close the door softly behind you and walk back to your chamber, the corridors quiet, the candles burning low. You prepare for bed with the same deliberate care you apply to all your rituals, but your mind is not on the day's politics or the morrow's demands. It is on the small, steady rhythms you have woven into your children's lives, the minute of stillness, the consistent meals, the calming stories. You know that these repetitions are not mundane, they are foundational, they are the invisible architecture of character, and as you slip beneath the sheets, feeling the cool linen against your skin, you allow yourself a moment of quiet pride. You have not just raised children, you have cultivated humans. And in a world that often values spectacle over substance, that is the most radical act of all. Sleep comes easily tonight, not because the world is perfect, but because you have done what you can to make your corner of it steady, kind, and true. You wake to the soft, predictable sound of footsteps in the antechamber, the gentle rustle of fabric, the quiet clink of porcelain as your morning chocolate is prepared. The light filtering through the heavy damask curtains is pale and diffused, casting the room in a gentle, dreamlike haze. You do not rise immediately. You lie for a moment, feeling the weight of the feather mattress beneath you, the cool smoothness of the linen against your skin, the steady rhythm of your own breath. This is your time, the quiet space between sleep and ceremony, where you are simply yourself before the day begins to layer its expectations upon you. But the ritual awaits, and you know that in monarchy, even the most personal acts become public performances. So you inhale deeply, exhale slowly, and signal that you are ready. The ceremonial dressing, the royal toilette, begins not with haste, but with a deliberate, almost meditative pace. Your attendants enter in a specific order, each with a designated role, each moving with the quiet precision of people who have rehearsed this dance countless times. First, the chambermaid who helps you from the bed, her hands gentle but firm as she supports your elbow. Then the lady of the bedchamber, who oversees the process with a calm, supervisory gaze. You stand before the looking glass, not to admire, but to observe. The woman reflected back is both familiar and formal, a figure to be prepared not for vanity, but for duty. The air in the dressing room carries the faint, powdery scent of orris root, the clean smell of freshly laundered linen, and the subtle warmth of beeswax from the candles that burn even in daylight to ensure consistent light. The first layer is always the chemise, a simple garment of fine linen that feels cool against your skin. You raise your arms as it is slipped over your head, the fabric whispering softly as it settles. Next come the stays, the structured undergarment that shapes the torso, not to constrain but to support. The lacings are tightened gradually, evenly, with a steady pressure that feels more like an embrace than a restriction. You breathe deeply as they are secured, learning long ago to expand your ribs laterally rather than vertically. It is not uncomfortable, it is simply a different way of inhabiting your body. You feel the gentle compression, the way it encourages posture, the subtle reminder that your physical presence is part of your role. The stays are not armor, but they are a framework, a quiet assertion of order. Then come the petticoats, layer upon layer of silk and wool, each one adding volume, each one rustling softly as you move. You step into them one at a time, your attendant smoothing the fabric, ensuring there are no wrinkles, no uneven hems. The sound is rhythmic, almost hypnotic. The soft swish of silk against silk, the gentle pat of hands adjusting folds. You stand still, your feet slightly apart, your gaze fixed on a point on the opposite wall. You do not fidget. You have learned that stillness is a form of participation. The next layer is the pocket, a tie-on pouch worn beneath the skirts, where you might keep a small notebook, a scent bottle, or a comforting trinket. It is a private space within the public costume, a secret compartment for the self that exists beneath the ceremony. The gown itself is a masterpiece of slow craftsmanship. You watch in the mirror as it is brought forward, held aloft by two attendants to avoid touching the floor. The silk is heavy, luminous, dyed a deep shade of sapphire that complements your complexion without demanding attention. The embroidery is subtle, silver thread woven in floral patterns that catch the light only when you move. You step into the gown and the attendants begin the intricate process of fastening. Hooks and eyes, tiny buttons, concealed laces. Each closure is secured with meticulous care. The sound is a soft series of clicks and pulls, a quiet percussion that marks the progression of the ritual. You feel the weight of the fabric settle on your shoulders, the way it drapes, the way it moves with you. It is not a costume you wear, it is a second skin you inhabit. Now comes the powdering. This is perhaps the most meditative part of the toilette. You sit before the looking glass, a linen cloth draped over your shoulders to protect the gown. The powder, a fine scented mixture of wheat starch and orris root, is held in a delicate puff made of silk and down. Your attendant stands behind you, and with gentle rhythmic motions begins to apply the powder to your hair. The sensation is light, almost ticklish, as the fine particles settle. The scent is clean, slightly floral, with an earthy undertone that reminds you of dried herbs. You close your eyes as the powder is worked through your curls, the repetitive motion of the puff, creating a soft whispering sound that blends with the quiet murmur of the room. You breathe in the scent, letting it anchor you in the present moment. The powder is not just cosmetic, it is a ritual of refinement, a way of marking the transition from private self to public figure. There is a quirky detail you have incorporated into your powdering routine, one that brings you a small, private pleasure. You keep a single, perfect lavender blossom tucked into the corner of your powder box. It is not part of the mixture, it is simply there, a tiny burst of colour and fragrance that you notice each time the lid is lifted. You discovered this practice in an old household manual from your grandmother's collection, which suggested that a personal token hidden in one's toiletries could serve as a secret anchor to the soul. You appreciate the sentiment. When the day becomes particularly demanding, you catch a glimpse of that lavender petal, and it reminds you that beneath the ceremony you are still the girl who counted lavender buds in Ansbach, who found comfort in small repetitive acts. It is a tiny rebellion against the impersonal nature of royalty, a whisper of individuality in a world of protocol. The final touches are applied with the same unhurried precision. Gloves are drawn on, finger by finger, a necklace is fastened at your throat, its weight a gentle reminder of your position. Shoes are slipped on, their heels low enough for stability, high enough for dignity. You stand, and the attendants step back to survey their work. You do not see a transformation, you see a completion. The woman in the mirror is ready, not because she is adorned, but because she is prepared. You thank your attendants with a quiet nod, a word of appreciation spoken softly. They respond in kind, their expressions calm, their movements graceful as they clear the dressing room, leaving you alone for a final moment before the day begins in earnest. You take a slow breath, feeling the layers of fabric, the structure of the stays, the weight of the gown. You feel not trapped but contained, not disguised but defined. The ceremonial dressing is not a burden, it is a meditation in motion. Each layer is a reminder of the role you have chosen, the responsibilities you have accepted, the identity you have cultivated. You walk to the window and look out at the gardens of Kensington, still dewy in the morning light. The world beyond is bustling, demanding, unpredictable. But here, in this room, you have created a pocket of order, a ritual that grounds you before you step into the chaos. You have learned that ceremony, when done with intention, is not empty performance. It is a way of aligning your inner self with your outer duty. Historians still argue whether the elaborate toilette rituals of 18th century queens like Caroline were primarily about displaying power and status, or whether they served a deeper psychological function, providing a structured, meditative space for women whose lives were otherwise subject to constant public scrutiny. You sit with that debate as you adjust a fold of your sleeve, feeling the smooth silk beneath your fingertips. You know that for you it is both. The ritual is political. It signals your place in the hierarchy, your adherence to courtly norms, but it is also personal. It gives you a moment of quiet focus, a chance to center yourself before the demands of the day begin. You do not need to choose between the two interpretations. You live in the space where they overlap. You turn from the window and make your way to the door, your steps measured, your posture upright. The gown moves with you, a soft rustle accompanying each stride. You are ready. Not because the dressing is complete, but because you have used the ritual to prepare your mind as well as your body. You have layered not just silk and powder, but intention and calm. You open the door and step into the corridor where the day awaits. With its correspondence, its counsel, its endless, repetitive, deeply meaningful tasks, you move forward not with dread, but with a quiet certainty. You have dressed not just for the world, but for yourself. And that, you have learned, is the most important ceremony of all. You settle into the chair at your writing desk, the leather cushions sighing softly beneath you as you adjust your posture. The room is quiet, save for the gentle crackle of the fire in the hearth and the distant rhythmic ticking of the long case clock in the corridor. Morning light filters through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that dance in lazy spirals above the polished surface of your desk. Before you lies an array of papers, letters sealed with wax, dispatches tied with ribbon, memoranda folded with precise creases. The air carries the familiar scent of ink, of aged paper, of the beeswax polish that keeps the wood gleaming. You dip your quill into the inkwell, feeling the slight resistance as the nib gathers its load, and you begin. The scratch of the quill is a sound you have come to love, a soft rhythmic percussion that marks the passage of thought onto page. You write with deliberation, each letter formed with care, each word weighed before it is committed to paper. This is not hurried correspondence. This is counsel in motion. You respond to a letter from a bishop in Canterbury, discussing the delicate balance between church authority and royal prerogative. Your tone is respectful but firm, your arguments laid out with the same logical precision you learned in Berlin. You do not rush to conclusion. You allow the reasoning to unfold, step by step, like a path through a well-tended garden. You blot the ink with a sprinkle of sand, watch as it absorbs the excess, and brush it away with a soft cloth. The process is meditative, almost hypnotic. Next, a dispatch from a diplomat in Vienna. The news is complex. Shifting alliances, whispered negotiations, the eternal dance of European power. You read it twice, your eyes moving slowly across the page, absorbing not just the facts but the subtext. What is not said is often as important as what is. You take a moment to consider your response, your fingers steepled beneath your chin, your gaze fixed on the middle distance. You think about the principles you hold, the relationships you have cultivated, the long-term vision you carry for Britain's place in the world. Then you begin to write again, the quill moving with renewed purpose. You do not offer grand pronouncements, you offer steady guidance. You suggest, you inquire, you gently steer. Your words are not commands. They are invitations to thoughtful action. There is a particular rhythm to your correspondence that you have cultivated over the years. Mornings are for intellectual and philosophical letters, responses to scholars, reflections on new publications, discussions of scientific discoveries. Afternoons are for political and administrative matters, dispatches to ministers, counsel to the king, guidance to colonial governors. Evenings, if time permits, are for personal letters, notes to family, condolences to friends, encouragement to those you mentor. This structure is not rigid. It is flexible enough to accommodate urgency, but firm enough to provide a framework for your day. You have learned that consistency in process allows for creativity in content. The routine frees the mind to focus on what matters. You pause occasionally to stretch your fingers, to roll your shoulders, to take a slow sip of the watered wine that sits beside your desk. These small breaks are not interruptions, they are part of the rhythm. You look out the window at the gardens, watching the gardeners move with their own quiet purpose, trimming hedges, raking paths, tending to the roses. You find a kinship with their work. Like them, you are cultivating something that requires patience, attention, and a belief in the value of steady effort. You return to your writing, the quill finding its rhythm once more. There is a quirky detail you have incorporated into your correspondence routine, one that brings you a small private satisfaction. You keep a single, smooth river stone on the corner of your desk, a pale grey pebble you picked up during a walk along the Thames years ago. It is not ornamental, it is functional. You use it as a paperweight, yes, but also as a tactile anchor. When your thoughts become scattered, when the weight of decisions feels heavy, you pick up the stone and roll it gently between your fingers. Its cool weight, its smooth surface, its simple presence remind you that complexity can be held in a single, steady object. You discovered this practice in a letter from a German philosopher who wrote about the wisdom of small, tangible things. You appreciated the insight. Now, when you feel the stone beneath your fingertips, you remember that even the most abstract counsel must be grounded in something real. Your correspondence is not merely administrative. It is a form of intellectual governance. You exchange ideas with the leading minds of your age, philosophers, scientists, theologians, poets. You discuss Locke's theories of government, Newton's principles of motion, the ethical implications of new scientific discoveries. You do not pretend to be an expert in all fields. You pretend to be a curious interlocutor, someone who asks thoughtful questions and listens carefully to the answers. Your letters are often cited not because they are brilliant, but because they are clear. You have a gift for distilling complex ideas into accessible language, for finding the common thread that connects disparate disciplines. You write not to impress, but to illuminate. One afternoon, you receive a letter from a young woman in the colonies, asking for advice on establishing a school for girls. The question is practical, but the implications are profound. You consider your response carefully. You think about the education you received, the opportunities you have had, the barriers that still exist. You write back not with a prescription, but with principles. You suggest starting small, with a focus on literacy and numeracy, but also on critical thinking and moral reasoning. You encourage her to adapt her methods to the local context, to listen to the community she serves, to measure success not in grand achievements but in small, steady progress. You sign the letter with your usual closing, with steady regard, and you feel a quiet sense of purpose. This, too, is governance. Not the signing of treaties, but the nurturing of potential. Historians still argue whether Caroline's extensive correspondence was primarily a tool of political influence, allowing her to shape policy and counsel ministers from behind the scenes, or whether it was mainly an intellectual outlet, a way for a curious mind to engage with the ideas of her time without the constraints of formal authority. You sit with that debate as you seal a letter with wax, pressing your signet ring into the soft surface with a firm, deliberate motion. You know that for you it is both. The letters are political. They carry your counsel, your perspective, your quiet influence. But they are also personal. They satisfy your curiosity, feed your intellect, connect you to a community of thinkers. You do not need to choose between the two interpretations. You live in the space where they overlap. As the afternoon light begins to soften, you review the day's correspondence. You have written to a bishop, a diplomat, a young educator, a philosopher, a colonial governor. Each letter is different in content, but similar in tone. Respectful, thoughtful, steady. You stack them neatly, tie them with ribbon, and place them in the outgoing tray. The process is complete, but the work is not. Governance is not a series of discrete tasks. It is a continuous flow of attention, of consideration, of care. You rise from your desk, your joints stiff from sitting, your mind full but not fatigued. You walk to the window and look out at the gardens once more. The light is golden now, casting long shadows across the lawns. The gardeners have finished their work for the day. Their tools are stacked neatly against the shed. You feel a kinship with their quiet diligence. You take a moment to stretch, to breathe, to let the stillness of the room settle around you. The fire crackles softly. The clock ticks steadily. The papers on your desk are in order. You have done what you can today. Not everything, perhaps, but enough. You have offered counsel where it was needed, asked questions where answers were unclear, listened where silence was required. You have used your mind not as a weapon, but as a tool for connection, for clarification, for care. And in a world that often values speed over substance, that is a quiet but significant act. You extinguish the candle on your desk, though the room is still lit by the fading daylight. You arrange your quills, your inkwells, your papers with the same care you apply to all your rituals. You do not rush, you do not linger. You simply complete the task, and in doing so, you honor the work itself. You step away from the desk and make your way to the door, your footsteps soft on the carpet. The corridor beyond is quiet, the house settling into its evening rhythm. You have more to do before the day is done. Meetings to attend, family to see, preparations for tomorrow to consider. But for this moment, you allow yourself a brief pause. You have written your letters. You have offered your counsel. You have used your mind in the service of something larger than yourself. And that, you have learned, is its own form of prayer. You feel the subtle shift in the house's atmosphere as the hour for dinner approaches, a gentle stirring in the corridors, the soft clatter of silver being polished one final time, the faint, warm scent of roasting meat beginning to drift from the kitchens below. You do not hurry. You never hurry. You simply allow the rhythm of the day to carry you forward, like a leaf on a slow-moving stream. You make your way to the dressing room for a final adjustment, a smoothing of your skirts, a check of your pearls, a quiet breath to center yourself. Then you proceed to the dining chamber, your footsteps silent on the runner, your posture upright but not rigid. The meal awaits, and with it the comforting repetition of ritual. The dining room is arranged with the same meticulous care you apply to all things. The long table gleams under the light of beeswax candles, their flames steady in the draught-free air. The china is spode, delicate but durable, each piece placed with geometric precision. Plate, charger, napkin, forks to the left, knives and spoons to the right, glasses arranged in a gentle arc. The silverware is polished to a soft luster, not a blinding shine, enough to reflect the candlelight without glaring. The air carries the layered aromas of the meal to come, the earthy scent of root vegetables, the rich perfume of roasted game, the subtle tang of wine decanting in crystal. You take your seat at the head of the table, not with ceremony, but with the quiet assurance of someone who has performed this act countless times. The service begins not with a fanfare, but with a soft, synchronized movement. Footmen enter from the side door, their steps measured, their expressions neutral. They carry covered dishes on silver trays, moving with the grace of people who have practiced this dance until it becomes second nature. The first course is presented, a clear consommé, steaming gently in porcelain bowls. You lift your spoon, a delicate thing of silver, light in the hand, and take a slow sip. The broth is warm, savoury, soothing. It is not meant to dazzle, it is meant to prepare. You eat in silence, as is customary. Conversation at the royal table is not forbidden, but it is restrained. Polite inquiries, measured responses, nothing that might disrupt the digestive process. You have learned that eating well is not just a pleasure, it is a duty. A queen who cannot manage her meals cannot be expected to manage a kingdom. The next course arrives. Poached fish, delicate and flaky, served with a sauce of butter and herbs. You cut a small portion with your knife, the blade gliding through the flesh with minimal resistance. You chew slowly, savoring the texture, the flavor, the quiet satisfaction of a meal prepared with care. Around you, your guests, family, trusted advisor, occasional honored visitors, eat with the same unhurried precision. There is no rush to finish, no pressure to perform. The rhythm of the meal is deliberate. Course pause, course pause. It is not a banquet designed to impress. It is a routine designed to nourish. You appreciate the difference. There is a quirky detail you have incorporated into your royal meals, one that brings you a small, private amusement. You always request that a single, perfect sprig of fresh mint be placed on your plate, not as garnish, but as a palate cleanser between courses. You discovered this practice in an old household manual from your grandmother's collection, which suggested that a moment of herbal freshness could help the diner maintain clarity of mind throughout a long meal. You appreciate the sentiment. When the meal becomes particularly rich or lengthy, you pause, pick up the mint sprig, and inhale its cool, clean scent. It is a tiny reset, a whisper of renewal in the midst of repetition. You later learn that this practice was not common in English courts, but you keep it anyway. Some traditions are worth creating for yourself. The main course follows: roasted venison, tender and flavorful, accompanied by stewed fruits and root vegetables glazed in honey. You take a modest portion, mindful of both appetite and decorum. You eat with attention, noticing the way the flavors complement one another, the way the textures contrast and harmonize. You do not overindulge, you do not undereat. You have learned that moderation is not deprivation, it is balance. You sip your wine, a light claret diluted with water as is your custom, feeling its gentle warmth spread through your chest. The conversation remains polite, restrained, a comment on the weather, a remark on a recent publication, a quiet inquiry about a mutual acquaintance, nothing controversial, nothing demanding. You have cultivated a table where the food is the focus, and the talk is merely its accompaniment. The dessert course is simple: a small tart of seasonal fruit, a dollop of lightly sweetened cream, a single biscuit for texture. You eat it slowly, savoring the sweetness without rushing. You have learned that ending a meal on a gentle note helps the body transition to rest. You do not linger over dessert. You do not rush through it. You simply complete the ritual, course by course, bite by bite. When the final plate is cleared, you sit for a moment in quiet satisfaction. The meal is over, but the rhythm remains. You rise from the table, not with a flourish, but with the same steady grace you have applied to every movement of the day. Historians still argue whether the elaborate dining rituals of Georgian royalty like Caroline were primarily about displaying wealth and power to guests, or whether they served a deeper psychological function, providing a structured meditative space for rulers whose lives were otherwise subject to constant public scrutiny and political pressure. You sit with that debate as you wash your hands in the silver basin presented by a footman, the water warm, the soap scented with lavender. You know that for you it is both. The meal is political. It signals your place in the hierarchy, your adherence to courtly norms. But it is also personal. It gives you a moment of quiet focus, a chance to nourish your body and mind before the evening's duties begin. You do not need to choose between the two interpretations. You live in the space where they overlap. You make your way from the dining room to the withdrawing room, where a fire crackles softly in the hearth and comfortable chairs await. You do not collapse into rest. You transition into it. You sip a cup of weak tea. You allow your digestion to begin its work. The conversation here is slightly more relaxed but still restrained. A comment on a garden bloom, a reflection on a book, a quiet plan for tomorrow. You listen more than you speak, your attention focused, your expression calm. You have learned that the end of a meal is not the end of community. It is a shift in its tone. You think about the repetition of it all, the same courses, the same etiquette, the same quiet rhythms, day after day. Some might call it boring, you call it grounding. In a world where so much is uncertain, politics, alliances, health, fate, the meal is a constant. You know what to expect. You know what is expected of you. And in that knowledge, you find a deep, settling calm. You have learned that routine is not the enemy of meaning, it is its vessel. The repetitive act of dining, done with intention, becomes a form of meditation. Each bite is a reminder to be present. Each pause is an invitation to reflect. Each course is a lesson in patience, As the evening deepens, you rise once moorished, your mind clear. You have more to do before the day is done. Perhaps a final letter, a brief meeting with a lady-in-waiting, a quiet moment with your children before they sleep. But you do not feel rushed. You do not feel weary. You feel steady. You have eaten your meal. You have honored the ritual. You have cared for your body so that it can continue to serve your purpose. And in a world that often values spectacle over substance, that is a quiet but significant act. You extinguish the final candle in the withdrawing room, though the fire still glows softly in the hearth. You make your way to your chamber, the house settling into its nighttime rhythm around you. The corridors are quiet, the servants have retired, and the only sound is the distant murmur of the city beyond the garden walls. You prepare for bed with the same deliberate care you apply to all your rituals, but your mind is not racing with the day's events. Instead, it is gently reviewing the meal, the flavors, the rhythms, the quiet satisfaction of a task completed well. You slip beneath the linen sheets, feeling their cool smoothness against your skin, and you let your thoughts drift like the embers in the hearth below, glowing but not demanding. You have nourished your body, you have honored your routine, you have found peace in the repetition, and as sleep begins to gather at the edges of your consciousness, you feel a profound sense of contentment, knowing that tomorrow's meal will come, and with it, the same quiet, steady rhythm that guides you still. You sit at your desk in the quiet hours of the afternoon, the light slanting through the library window in long golden bars that illuminate dust motes dancing in the still air. The room smells of leather-bound books, of dried lavender tucked between the pages, of the faint, clean scent of ink. Before you lies a letter not freshly arrived, but one you have read many times, the handwriting familiar, the arguments intricate, the mind behind it brilliant. It is from Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, the philosopher whose ideas have travelled across Europe to find a home in your thoughts. You do not rush to respond. You let his words settle, like sediment in a quiet pool, before you begin to form your own. The correspondence with Leibniz is not a debate in the modern sense, not a clash of opposing views, but a gentle, persistent exploration of shared questions. You write about the nature of monads, those indivisible units of reality he proposes, and you ask how such a metaphysical concept might inform the practical art of governance. He responds not with dismissal, but with curiosity, suggesting that just as monads reflect the entire universe from their own perspective, so too might a ruler consider how each decision echoes through the lives of subjects. You find this analogy comforting, not because it provides answers, but because it validates the complexity of your role. You are not just making policy, you are tending to a living, breathing system of interconnected souls. Your letters to Leibniz are written with the same deliberate care you apply to all your correspondence. You dip your quill, you consider each word, you allow your thoughts to unfold at their own pace. You do not write to impress, you write to understand. You ask about the relationship between faith and reason, about whether divine predestination negates human agency, about how a monarch might cultivate virtue in a court often driven by ambition. His replies arrive months later, carried by diplomatic pouch, their pages filled with dense, elegant prose that you read slowly, sometimes aloud, letting the rhythm of his sentences guide your comprehension. You keep these letters in a special portfolio, bound in soft leather, their edges slightly worn from repeated handling. They are not just documents, they are companions. There is a particular exchange that stays with you, one that exemplifies the unique character of your intellectual friendship. You had written to Leibniz about a problem that had been troubling you, how to balance the need for decisive action in your governance with the equally important need for thoughtful deliberation. He responded with a metaphor that you find both simple and profound. Consider the garden, he wrote. A gardener does not pull at every sprout to see if it is growing, nor does she ignore the weeds until they choke the flowers. She observes, she tends, she intervenes only when necessary, and always with an eye to the whole. You read this letter in the evening, by candlelight, and you feel a quiet sense of clarity. The metaphor does not solve your problem, but it reframes it. You begin to see your role not as a controller, but as a cultivator. You incorporate this gardening metaphor into your daily practice. When a political crisis arises, you do not react immediately. You observe, you gather information, you consider the long-term health of the kingdom, not just the short-term fix. You consult with ministers, but you also take time for solitary reflection, walking the gardens at Kensington, watching the way the plants respond to light and water, to pruning and patience. You find that the natural world often mirrors the political one, and that wisdom can be gleaned from both. You write to Leibniz about this insight, and he responds with enthusiasm, suggesting that your practical application of his philosophical ideas is itself a form of intellectual contribution. You do not seek fame for this exchange. You seek understanding, and in that seeking you find a deep, quiet satisfaction. There is a quirky detail you have incorporated into your correspondence with Leibniz, one that brings you a small, private pleasure. You always include a pressed flower or leaf from the Kensington Gardens with your letters, a sprig of rosemary for remembrance, a maple leaf for balance, a violet for modesty. You discovered this practice in an old German tradition of botanical epistles, where the sender would include a plant that symbolized the letter's sentiment. You appreciate the poetry of it. When you receive Leibniz's replies, you sometimes find a similar token, a dried sprig of German ivy, a fragment of oak the pages. These small natural enclosures transform your intellectual exchange into something more personal, more tactile. They remind you that even the most abstract ideas are rooted in the physical world, in the soil, in the seasons. You keep these botanical treasures in a small album, their colours faded but their presence enduring. Your discussions with Leibniz range widely, as your interests do. You talk about the new calculus, about the ethical implications of scientific discovery, about the role of women in intellectual life. You do not pretend to be his equal in mathematical rigour. You pretend to be his equal in curiosity. You ask questions that challenge him to explain complex ideas in accessible terms, and in doing so, you help him refine his own thinking. You have learned that teaching and learning are not separate acts. They are two sides of the same coin. Your correspondence becomes a kind of intellectual dance, each partner leading and following in turn, each step building on the last. Historians still argue whether Caroline's correspondence with Leibniz was primarily a genuine intellectual partnership that influenced his later work, or whether it was mainly a prestigious social connection that enhanced her reputation as a learned queen without substantially shaping philosophical discourse. You sit with that debate as you seal a letter with wax, pressing your signet ring into the soft surface with a firm, deliberate motion. You know that for you it is both. The letters are intellectual. They challenge your mind, expand your perspective, connect you to the cutting edge of European thought. But they are also social. They signal your place in the Republic of Letters, your commitment to the Enlightenment ideal of reasoned discourse. You do not need to choose between the two interpretations. You live in the space where they overlap. As the afternoon light begins to soften, you review the letter you have just written. You have asked about the relationship between individual freedom and collective good, about how a society might cultivate both without sacrificing one for the other. You have shared an observation from your own experience, that sometimes the most effective governance feels like invisible gardening, tending without overt control, guiding without coercion. You have enclosed a pressed sprig of lavender, its scent faint but persistent, a reminder of the quiet strength of principle. You blot the ink, you fold the paper, you address the envelope with your neat, careful script. The letter is ready to join the diplomatic pouch, to begin its long journey across the Channel, to find its way to Leibniz's desk in Hanover. You rise from your desk, your joints stiff from sitting, your mind full but not fatigued. You walk to the window and look out at the gardens, now bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. The gardeners are finishing their work for the day. Their tools are stacked neatly against the shed. You feel a kinship with their quiet diligence. Like them, you are cultivating something that requires patience, attention, and a belief in the value of steady effort. You take a slow breath, feeling the weight of the day, the satisfaction of a task completed well. You have written to Leibniz, you have engaged your mind, you have contributed in your small way to the great conversation of human understanding. And in a world that often values speed over substance, that is a quiet but significant act. You extinguish the candle on your desk, though the room is still lit by the fading daylight. You arrange your quills, your inkwells, your papers with the same care you apply to all your rituals. You do not rush. You do not linger. You simply complete the task, and in doing so you honor the work itself. You step away from the desk and make your way to the door, your footsteps soft on the carpet. The corridor beyond is quiet, the house settling into its evening rhythm. You have more to do before the day is done. Meetings to attend, family to see, preparations for tomorrow to consider. But for this moment you allow yourself a brief pause. You have written your letter. You have engaged your mind. You have used your intellect in the service of something larger than yourself. And that, you have learned, is its own form of prayer. You stand in the quiet corridor of Kensington Palace, the air carrying a faint medicinal scent, herbs, vinegar, the clean sharpness of boiled linen. The light is soft, diffused through high windows, casting long, gentle shadows that seem to move at the pace of your own breath. Today is not a day for ceremony, not for politics, not for the usual rhythms of court. Today is for observation, for care, for a quiet act of courage that will ripple through generations. You adjust the sleeves of your gown, not for appearance but for practicality, and you step forward, your footsteps silent on the runner. The room has been prepared with meticulous attention. It is not a laboratory in the modern sense, no gleaming instruments, no complex apparatus, but it is a space dedicated to method. A low bed covered in clean linen sits near the window where the light is best. A small table holds the tools of the procedure, a silver lancet, a glass vial containing the inoculation matter, a bowl of warm water, a soft cloth. The air is still, the silence broken only by the distant chirp of sparrows in the garden and the soft, steady breathing of the child who lies on the bed. You approach slowly, your presence calm, your expression neutral but attentive. This is not a moment for drama, it is a moment for precision. The procedure itself is simple, but its implications are profound. Variolation, the deliberate introduction of smallpox matter into a healthy person to induce a mild case and subsequent immunity, is not new. It has been practiced in parts of Asia and the Ottoman Empire for centuries, but in Britain it is still viewed with suspicion, even fear. You have spent months, even years, investigating the practice. You have corresponded with physicians across Europe. You have read accounts, weighed evidence, consulted with trusted advisors like Hans Sloane and Charles Maitland. You have not rushed to judgment. You have not been swayed by anecdote or emotion. You have demanded data. And now, having satisfied your own rigorous standards, you have given your approval for the procedure to be performed on your own children. You watch as the physician, his hands steady, his movements deliberate, prepares the lancet. He dips it into the vial, collecting a minute amount of matter from a mild case of smallpox. He approaches the child's arm, and with a gentle, almost imperceptible motion, makes a small scratch on the skin. The child does not cry out. They have been prepared, not with fear, but with calm explanation. You have taught them that this small discomfort is a step toward protection, toward health, toward a future free from the scourge that has claimed so many. You stand nearby, not interfering but present. Your role is not to perform the procedure, but to witness it, to ensure that it is done with care, with respect, with the utmost attention to the child's comfort. There is a quirky detail you have incorporated into the inoculation process, one that brings you a small, private sense of continuity. Before the procedure begins, you always place a single, smooth river stone, similar to the one on your desk, into the child's hand. You tell them to hold it, to feel its weight, its coolness, its steadiness. You explain that just as the stone remains constant even when the world around it changes, so too will their body find its balance after this small intervention. You discovered this practice in an old household manual from your grandmother's collection, which suggested that a tangible anchor can soothe the soul during times of physical transition. You appreciate the sentiment. You have seen how the simple act of holding the stone helps the child focus, breathe, remain calm. It is a tiny ritual within a larger one, a whisper of comfort in a moment of vulnerability. After the procedure, the real work begins: observation. You have established a strict protocol for monitoring the child's progress. Temperature is checked at regular intervals, not with complex instruments, but with the back of a hand against the forehead, a practice refined by generations of caregivers. The site of the inoculation is examined for signs of reaction, not with alarm, but with curiosity. The child's appetite, sleep, mood are all noted, recorded in a careful log that you review personally each day. You do not hover, you do not smother. You observe with the same detached attentiveness you apply to your correspondence, your salons, your governance. You have learned that care is not the same as interference. Sometimes the most loving act is to watch, to wait, to trust the body's own wisdom. The days that follow are a study in patience. The child develops a mild fever, a small rash at the site of the inoculation, exactly as the accounts from Constantinople described. You do not panic, you do not rush to intervene. You adjust the bedding, offer sips of watered wine, ensure the room is neither too warm nor too cool. You sit with the child during the quiet hours, reading softly, telling gentle stories, your presence a steady anchor in the slight storm of illness. You have prepared for this possibility. You are not surprised by it. You have faith in the method, not because it is perfect, but because it is evidence-based. You have weighed the risks, the small chance of a severe reaction, against the benefits, the high likelihood of lifelong immunity, and you have chosen the path of reasoned hope. Historians still argue whether Caroline's promotion of smallpox inoculation was primarily a maternal act driven by love for her children, or whether it was a calculated political move designed to position the Hanoverian dynasty as progressive and scientifically engaged in the eyes of the British public. You sit with that debate as you check the child's temperature one evening, your hand gentle against their forehead, your expression calm. You know that for you it is both. The decision is personal. It is about protecting the children you have raised, the future you have nurtured, but it is also political. It is about using your influence to advance a practice that could save countless lives, about demonstrating that royalty can embrace innovation without abandoning caution. You do not need to choose between the two interpretations. You live in the space where they overlap. As the child recovers, as the fever breaks, the rash fades, the energy returns. You feel a quiet sense of fulfillment that has nothing to do with titles or power. You have not just protected your own. You have helped legitimize a practice that could protect many. You have demonstrated that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. You have shown that progress is not made through grand pronouncements, but through careful, methodical steps. You make a note in your journal, not of triumph, but of gratitude. You thank the physicians, the nurses, the child for their trust, their patience, their partnership. You do not seek acclaim, you seek understanding. And in that seeking, you find a deep, quiet satisfaction. You extend the practice beyond your own family. You support the inoculation of orphans and prisoners, those whose lives are often deemed less valuable by society. Because you believe that if a practice is safe and effective, it should be available to all, not just the privileged. You oversee these experiments with the same meticulous care, ensuring that consent is sought where possible, that comfort is prioritized, that data is recorded honestly. You do not exploit, you elevate. You have learned that true leadership is not about wielding power over others, but about using influence to create conditions where others can thrive. The success of the royal inoculations begins to shift public opinion. Skeptics become curious. Critics become cautious supporters. Physicians who once dismissed variolation begin to study it more seriously. You do not take credit for this shift. You simply continue your work, your observation, your care. You write to your correspondents across Europe, sharing your findings, your methods, your reflections. You do not claim to have solved the problem of smallpox. You claim to have contributed a small piece to a larger puzzle. You have learned that change is not made in a single dramatic act, but in countless quiet moments of attention, of courage, of hope. As the weeks pass, the child returns to full health, their immunity secured, their future brightened. You watch them play in the garden, their laughter ringing in the crisp air, their movements light and free. You feel a profound sense of peace. You have done what you could. Not everything, perhaps, but enough. You have used your position not for personal gain, but for public good. You have embraced science not as a threat to faith, but as a complement to it. You have shown that a queen can be both devout and curious, both cautious and courageous. You take a moment to stand in the garden, the sun warm on your face, the scent of roses drifting on the breeze. You think about the smallpox that has claimed so many, the fear that has shadowed so many lives. You think about the quiet revolution you have helped to nurture, not with fanfare but with method, not with force but with care. You have learned that the most enduring changes are often the quietest, the most profound acts of leadership are often the least visible. You have inoculated not just bodies but minds against fear, against superstition, against the belief that progress and principle cannot coexist. You return to the palace, your steps measured, your mind clear. You have more to do before the day is done. Letters to write, meetings to attend, preparations for tomorrow to consider. But you do not feel rushed. You do not feel weary. You feel steady. You have overseen an experiment. You have advanced a cause. You have used your influence in the service of something larger than yourself. And in a world that often values spectacle over substance, that is a quiet but significant act. You extinguish the final candle in your study, though the moonlight still filters through the window. You prepare for bed with the same deliberate care you apply to all your rituals, but your mind is not racing with the day's events. Instead, it is gently reviewing the procedure, the precision, the patience, the quiet courage. You slip beneath the linen sheets, feeling their cool smoothness against your skin, and you let your thoughts drift like the embers in the hearth below, glowing but not demanding. You have protected the vulnerable. You have advanced knowledge. You have found peace in the method. And as sleep begins to gather at the edges of your consciousness, you feel a profound sense of contentment, knowing that tomorrow's work will come, and with it the same quiet, steady rhythm that guides you still. You push open the heavy oak door to the library, and the air shifts immediately, cooler, drier, carrying that particular scent that only old books possess. A blend of aged paper, leather bindings, cedar shelves, and the faint sweet perfume of dried lavender tucked between the pages to ward off moths. The light here is soft, filtered through tall windows with diamond-paned glass, casting gentle shifting patterns across the floorboards as clouds pass overhead. You do not enter with purpose, not exactly. You enter with presence. This is not a room for work, though work happens here. This is a room for wandering, for letting your mind drift along the spines of centuries, for allowing the quiet companionship of ideas to settle around you like a familiar shawl. You move slowly down the central aisle, your fingers brushing lightly against the leather bindings as you pass. The collection is vast but not ostentatious. These are not books acquired for display. They are books acquired for use. You pause at a shelf dedicated to natural philosophy, your eyes scanning the titles. Newton's Principia, its pages dog-eared from repeated consultation. Boyle's Sceptical Chymist, its margins filled with your own neat annotations in pencil. Hooke's Micrographia, its fold-out illustrations of fleas and cork cells, still capable of inspiring quiet wonder. You do not rush to pull one down. You simply let your gaze linger, appreciating the weight of knowledge contained in this single row. The leather is soft with age, the gold lettering slightly faded, the edges of the pages foxed with time. These are not pristine artifacts. They are working tools, their wear a testament to their utility. You continue your walk, your footsteps silent on the thick runner that protects the wooden floor. The next section holds theology and moral philosophy. Here the bindings are often darker, more somber, calfskin in deep browns and blacks, their spines stamped with simple, elegant titles. You pause at a volume of Locke's Two Treatises of Government, its pages marked with slips of paper at passages that discuss the relationship between consent and authority. You remember reading these words in the early years of your marriage, when the political landscape of Britain was still uncertain, when the Hanoverian succession needed not just legal legitimacy, but moral grounding. You did not agree with every proposition Locke advanced, but you appreciated his method. The careful reasoning, the respect for evidence, the willingness to question inherited assumptions. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the memory of that reading wash over you. The quiet of the morning, the scratch of your quill as you noted your reflections, the sense of intellectual partnership with a mind you would never meet in person. There is a quirky detail you have incorporated into your library routine, one that brings you a small, private pleasure. At the end of each shelf, tucked discreetly behind a larger volume, you keep a single, pressed flower that corresponds to the subject matter of that section. a sprig of sage for wisdom in the philosophy aisle, a clover for hope in the theology section, a tiny rosemary branch for remembrance in the history collection. You discovered this practice in an old German tradition of Bibliotheca Botanica, where librarians would use plants to symbolically categorize knowledge. You appreciate the poetry of it. When you are searching for a particular book, the subtle scent of the corresponding herb sometimes guides you before your eyes do. It is a tiny sensory map within the larger architecture of the library, a whisper of nature amid the world of words. You later learn that this practice was entirely your own invention at Kensington, but you keep it anyway. Some traditions are worth creating for yourself. You reach the far end of the room where a comfortable armchair sits near the window, its upholstery worn but clean, its cushions slightly indented from years of use. This is your chair, though you do not claim it exclusively. It is simply the spot where the light is best in the afternoon, where the breeze from the open window carries the scent of the garden, without disturbing the pages of an open book. You sink into it now, not with exhaustion, but with the quiet satisfaction of arriving at a destination you have chosen. You pick up a volume from the small table beside the chair, a collection of essays by Addison and Steele, their prose with its substantive, their observations on society sharp but kind. You open it to a marked page, and you begin to read, not aloud, but in the gentle murmur of your inner voice. The act of reading in this room is different from reading elsewhere. Here, you are not seeking information. You are seeking companionship. The books are not sources to be mined, they are minds to be conversed with. You read a passage and you pause, letting the idea resonate. You consider how it connects to something you read last week, or last year, or in a letter from a correspondent across the channel. You do not take notes, you do not analyze, you simply allow the thought to settle, to integrate, to become part of the quiet tapestry of your understanding. The only sound is the soft turn of a page, the distant chirp of a bird outside the window, the gentle creak of the chair as you shift your weight. It is a meditation in motion, a way of thinking that does not demand productivity, only presence. You think about the organization of the library, not as a librarian would, but as a reader. The books are arranged not strictly by subject, but by association, by the connections you have noticed between ideas, by the conversations that have unfolded in your mind across different disciplines. A treatise on optics sits next to a volume of metaphysical poetry, because both explore the nature of perception. A work on colonial governance shares a shelf with a collection of travel narratives, because both consider the ethics of encounter. You have learned that knowledge is not a series of discrete compartments. It is a web, and the library is its physical manifestation. You do not need a catalogue to find what you seek. You need only to follow the thread of your curiosity. Historians still argue whether Caroline's personal library at Kensington was primarily a reflection of her genuine intellectual interests, or whether it was carefully curated to project an image of learned queenship to visitors and correspondents. You sit with that debate as you close the Addison essay and set it gently on the table. You know that for you, it is both. The books are personal. They satisfy your curiosity, feed your mind, provide comfort in times of uncertainty. But they are also political. They signal your commitment to the Enlightenment ideal of reasoned discourse, your belief that a ruler should be informed by the best thinking of her age. You do not need to choose between the two interpretations. You live in the space where they overlap. You rise from the chair, not because you are finished, but because you have absorbed enough for now. You walk to the window and look out at the gardens, now bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. The roses are in bloom, their petals soft and luminous, their scent drifting through the open casement. You think about the books behind you, the ideas they contain, the minds they represent. You think about the quiet privilege of having access to such knowledge, of having the time and space to engage with it. You do not take this privilege for granted. You have learned that wisdom is not a possession, it is a practice, and the library is its sanctuary. You make your way back through the aisle, your fingers once again brushing the spines as you pass. You pause at a section of poetry. Milton, Dryden, a few volumes of German verse you brought with you from Ansbach. You pull down a small collection of George Herbert's poems, its binding simple, its pages thin with age. You open it to a random page and your eyes on a line. Love bade me welcome. You read it silently, letting the words settle. You do not analyze the metaphor. You do not unpack the theology. You simply let the sentiment wash over you. The idea of being welcomed, not for your achievements, not for your status, but simply for your presence. You close the book and return it to its place, feeling a quiet sense of gratitude. You extinguish the candle on the reading table, though the room is still lit by the fading daylight. You arrange the chairs, straighten the runner, ensure that the books you have consulted are returned to their proper places. You do not rush, you do not linger. You simply complete the ritual, and in doing so, you honor the space itself. You step to the door and pause for a moment, looking back at the room. The shelves rise like quiet sentinels, the windows frame the garden like a living painting. The air carries the scent of knowledge and time. You feel a deep, settling calm. This room is not just a repository of books, it is a repository of self. Here you can think without performance, learn without expectation, simply be without justification. You close the door softly behind you, the latch clicking with a gentle, final sound. The corridor beyond is quiet, the house settling into its evening rhythm. You have more to do before the day is done. Perhaps a final letter, a brief meeting with a lady in waiting, a quiet moment with your children before they sleep. But you do not feel rushed. You do not feel weary. You feel steady. You have wandered among books. You have conversed with minds. You have used your intellect, not as a weapon, but as a tool for connection, for clarification, for care. And in a world that often values speed over substance, that is a quiet but significant act. You make your way to your chamber, your footsteps soft on the carpet, your mind clear but not empty. You prepare for bed with the same deliberate care you apply to all your rituals, but your thoughts are not racing with the day's events. Instead, they are gently reviewing the library, the scent of leather and paper, the weight of a well-made book in your hands, the quiet companionship of ideas. You slip beneath the linen sheets, feeling their cool smoothness against your skin, and you let your thoughts drift like the dust motes in the library's afternoon light, slow, gentle, unhurried. You have tended your mind, you have honored your curiosity, you have found peace in the quiet company of books, and as sleep begins to gather at the edges of your consciousness, you feel a profound sense of contentment, knowing that tomorrow's reading will come, and with it, the same quiet, steady rhythm that guides you still. You step from the quiet shade of the library corridor out into the open air, the change in temperature immediate but gentle, like slipping a cool hand against your forehead. The sun is high, but the English sky softens its glare, casting a diffused, pearl-grey light over the grounds of Richmond. You leave the wide gravel paths behind, following a narrower track that winds toward the riverbank, your footsteps naturally decelerating as the landscape asks for a slower pace. The air here carries the damp, mineral scent of wet earth, of decaying leaves, of the distant, rhythmic lap of the Thames against the shore. You let your shoulders drop, feeling the familiar tension of courtly expectation melt into the soil beneath your soles. This is a place designed not for spectacle but for retreat, and the moment you cross the threshold of the garden path, you feel it. The trees stand in deliberate asymmetry, their branches pruned and trained over years to frame the sky in quiet, irregular compositions. Nothing is accidental, nothing is rushed. You walk as if moving through a living manuscript, each step a slow turn of the page. Ahead, the earth rises gently, forming a low, moss-covered mound that seems to breathe with the season. At its base lies the entrance to the grotto, framed by rough-hewn stones and cascading ivy that sways in the faint breeze. You approach slowly, your fingertips brushing against the cool, damp bark of an ancient oak as you pass. The entrance is narrow, almost hesitant, as if the structure itself is asking you to leave the outside world behind before stepping in. You lower your head slightly and cross the threshold. The light shifts instantly, from open sky to filtered twilight. The air inside is still heavy with the scent of wet stone, of crushed ferns, of the quiet, ancient smell of earth that has been undisturbed for centuries. You let your eyes adjust, watching as shapes slowly resolve from the shadows. The walls are lined with tufa rock, porous and jagged, embedded with shells, quartz, and fragments of sea glass that catch the dim light like scattered stars. The floor is uneven, covered in a thin layer of crushed gravel that muffles your steps. turning your movement into a soft, rhythmic whisper. You move deeper into the chamber, the space opening slightly into a domed hollow where ceilings arcs overhead like the inside of a weathered seashell. A small trickle of water runs down one wall, fed by a hidden lead pipe that mimics a natural spring, its sound a steady, hypnotic drip 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 that syncs with your breathing. You pause near a low stone bench, its surface worn smooth by years of quiet sitting. You lower yourself into it, feeling the cool stone seep gently through the fabric of your skirt. This is not a place of grandeur, it is a place of compression. The weight of the earth above you feels not oppressive but protective. You sit, you listen. You let the cool air settle against your skin, watching as dust motes drift through the narrow slits of light that pierce the ceiling. The grotto does not ask you to do anything. It simply asks you to be here. At the far end of the chamber, partially veiled by a curtain of creeping moss and shadow, sits the figure of Merlin himself. Carved from pale limestone, his beard flows in stylized waves, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the wall, somewhere outside of time. Beside him stand other figures, a philosopher holding an open book, a shepherd leaning on a crook, a cloaked woman whose features blur between muse and oracle, their poses relaxed, their expressions unreadable. They were commissioned not as idols, but as companions in thought, placed here to populate your solitude with quiet company. You trace the outline of Merlin's stone robes with your gaze, noting the careful accumulation of lichen that the years have added to the original carving. The cave was designed to evoke an ancient British past, a romantic vision of wisdom rooted in the land itself, long before courts and crowns complicated the simple act of thinking. You understand the appeal completely. In a world of shifting alliances and public performances, this space offers something simpler, a return to myth, to slow contemplation, to the idea that knowledge does not always announce itself. There is a quirky detail you notice near the base of the philosopher's statue, one that most visitors would miss entirely unless they sat still long enough to hear it. Tucked into a crevice of the rockwork is a small hollowed-out conch shell, wired subtly to catch the steady drip of water from above. When the water hits it at just the right angle, it produces a low, resonant hum, a frequency so soft you feel it in your ribs more than hear it with your ears. You lean close, letting the vibration settle against your collarbone, closing your eyes as the sound wraps around you like a woolen blanket. The hum is almost imperceptible, a quiet acoustic trick engineered by the landscape architects to mimic the distant drone of bees or the sigh of wind through river reeds. You recall mentioning, half in jest during a planning meeting, that the cave felt too silent for thinking. The designers took your remark as a quiet directive. You appreciate the gentle humor of it. Now, every time you visit, that faint hum serves as a reminder that even stillness can be crafted, that silence is not an absence, but a carefully held note. You lean back against the stone bench, your posture relaxed but your mind alert, and watch as a slow cloud passes overhead, shifting the quality of the light inside the chamber, from cool grey to warm amber. The grotto feels suspended outside of time, a pocket of the 18th century that refuses to hurry, refuses to perform, refuses to justify its own existence. Historians still argue whether Merlin's cave was primarily a whimsical retreat for royal leisure, or a carefully coded political statement about ancient British sovereignty and enlightened governance. You sit with that debate in the quiet, feeling the truth settle somewhere in the damp mineral air. You know it was both, and neither, and something else entirely. It was a place to rest, yes, but also a place to reflect on the nature of rule itself. The figures you surround yourself with are not warriors or conquerors. They are thinkers, myth-makers, quiet observers. They remind you that leadership, at its best, is not exercised through volume, but through attention. You let the thought linger, unhurried, unforced, like water pooling in the hollow of a stone. The air grows cooler as the afternoon deepens, and you pull your shawl tighter around your shoulders, the wool familiar and comforting against your skin. Outside, the distant sound of a gardener's shears snips through the stillness, a rhythmic metallic click that anchors you to the present moment. You think about how strange it would seem to a modern observer that a queen would commission an artificial cave, populate it with stone sages, and visit it alone just to sit and listen to dripping water and a humming shell. They might call it eccentric. You call it necessary. In a life measured by schedules, petitions, diplomatic pouches, and public appearances, you have carved out a space where time is allowed to collect. You do not come here to escape duty. You come here to remember why duty requires patience. The grotto does not offer answers, it offers breath, and sometimes, after weeks of political maneuvering and courtly negotiations, breath is exactly what the crown requires. You rise slowly, your joints adjusting to the change in posture, and step back toward the entrance. The light has shifted again, the twilight outside softening into a pale lavender hue that paints the garden paths in muted tones. You pause at the threshold, looking back one last time at the quiet chamber. The water still drips, the stone figures still watch, the shell still hums faintly, steadily, exactly as you left it. You do not feel the need to linger. You have taken what you came for, a moment of stillness, a reset of the mind, a gentle realignment of your thoughts before the evening's obligations begin. You step out into the garden air, the coolness a soft shock that feels like a blessing. The path back to the palace winds through stands of beech trees, their leaves rustling in a slow, synchronized whisper that matches your breathing. You walk at your usual pace, your footsteps measured, your posture straight but unrigid. The grotto will remain here, waiting, as it always does. You will return when the weight of the court grows heavy, when the questions outpace the answers, when the rhythm of your days needs recalibrating. For now, you carry the quiet with you. You make your way back toward the main house, the gravel crunching softly beneath your shoes in a steady, predictable rhythm. The sky is darkening, the first stars appearing as pale pinpricks against the fading light. You feel grounded, not by ceremony but by earth. The designed landscape has done its work, not through grandeur but through gentleness. You think about the layers of stone, the hidden lead pipes, the carefully placed shells, the slow accumulation of moss over years of quiet visits. It is a landscape that does not demand, it receives. And as you approach the terrace, where the windows of the palace begin to glow with lamplight, you feel ready for what comes next. The kingdom will wait, the correspondence will pile up, the routines will resume. But you have visited the cave, you have listened to the water, you have let the silence do its work. And that, you have learned, is the quietest kind of preparation. You wake to the sound of rain against the window panes, a soft, steady percussion that matches the rhythm already beating in your chest. The sky is the colour of wet slate, and the corridors of St. James's Palace stretch out before you, quiet but expectant. The king is away at Hanover, attending to ancestral estates, negotiating continental alliances, or simply breathing air that does not smell of coal smoke and river damp. It does not matter why he has gone. What matters is that you are here, and the crown has temporarily settled on your shoulders, not with a crash, not with a proclamation, but with a quiet, familiar weight. You adjust your shawl, step into your morning slippers, and make your way to the council chamber. Regency is not an event. It is a routine, and like any good routine, it asks only that you show up and pay attention. The chamber itself is unassuming. Dark wood paneling, a long table scarred by decades of ink spills and nervous fingers, high-backed chairs that creak slightly when you shift your weight. You take your seat at the head, not with flourish, but with the practiced ease of someone who has occupied this position more times than she can count. The ministers arrive in staggered succession, their footsteps echoing in the corridor before they push through the heavy oak doors. There is no fanfare. There is only the soft shuffle of coats being hung, the rustle of papers being unrolled, the quiet clearing of throats. You do not rush them. You allow the morning to unfold at its own pace, letting the rain against the glass set the tempo for the day. Modern bureaucracies might call this inefficient. You call it necessary. A kingdom cannot be managed on adrenaline. The work begins not with grand decrees, but with ledgers. Trade reports from Bristol, tax assessments from Yorkshire, correspondence from colonial governors, petitions from merchants whose ships have been delayed by shifting winds. You read each document slowly, your finger tracing the lines as you absorb the details. You do not skim, you do not delegate blindly. You have learned that stability is built on attention, on the willingness to sit with the mundane until it yields its patterns. When a minister presents a proposal wrapped in urgent language, you ask for the underlying numbers. When a crisis is framed as an existential threat, You request the historical precedent. You do not enjoy conflict, but you do not fear it either. You approach it the way a gardener approaches overgrown vines, methodically, patiently, cutting away only what is necessary to preserve the whole. There is a particular rhythm to your regency that you have cultivated over the years. Mornings are for domestic administration, infrastructure, finance, the quiet machinery of daily governance. Afternoons are for correspondence, dispatches to Hanover, replies to ambassadors, carefully worded assurances that the kingdom remains steady in the king's absence. Evenings are for review, for cross-referencing decisions, for ensuring that no single action has unintended consequences down the line. You keep this schedule not out of rigidity, but out of respect for the human mind. You know that fatigue breeds poor judgment, that rushed decisions fracture alliances, that consistency is the quietest form of power. So you pace yourself. You allow pauses. You let the rain fall, the clock tick, the papers stack, and you move through them all with the same unhurried precision. There is a quirky detail you keep on your desk during Regency sessions, one that your ministers have long since stopped questioning. It is a small brass sandglass no taller than your thumb, filled with pale blue glass sand. You turn it at the start of every major deliberation. When the sand runs out, you call for a recess, not because the hour has passed, but because the conversation needs to breathe. You discovered this practice in Berlin, where an old tutor insisted that no decision made without a pause is a decision worth keeping. You appreciate the simplicity of it. Now, when tensions rise over trade tariffs or colonial disputes, you simply turn the glass. The ministers learn to expect it. They begin to pace their arguments accordingly. You watch the sand fall, feeling the gentle release it brings to your own shoulders. It is a tiny mechanism, but it has prevented more than one hasty decree from becoming permanent law. The political landscape is rarely calm, even when you are. Factions vie for favor, rivals test boundaries, whispers travel faster than official reports, and court gossip has a way of dressing speculation as fact. You do not try to silence the noise, you filter it. You separate signal from sentiment, fact from fear. When a minister warns of Jacobite sympathies stirring in the Highlands, you do not panic. You request troop movements, supply routes, intelligence reports. You cross-reference them with agricultural yields, tax collection rates, local magistrate correspondence. You look for patterns, not prophecies. You have learned that governance is not about predicting the future, it is about preparing for it. So you draft contingency plans, but you do not announce them. You move quietly, steadily, ensuring that if a storm comes, the foundations will hold. Historians still argue whether Caroline's repeated regencies were primarily a testament to her administrative competence, or whether they were largely ceremonial, rubber-stamping decisions already made by Walpole's ministry while the king was abroad. You sit with that debate as you sign a routine customs order, the ink drying slowly beneath your pen. You know the truth is messier, quieter. You do not govern alone. You govern within a system, navigating the space between royal prerogative and parliamentary reality. You do not need to be the sole architect of policy to be its stabilizing force. You provide the continuity, the calm, the refusal to let urgency override prudence. You are the steady hand on the tiller when the sea grows choppy, and that is enough. As the afternoon light begins to fade, you review the day's decisions. You do not celebrate. You do not lament. You simply note them, filing them away in the quiet archive of your mind. You dispatch letters to Hanover, your tone measured, your updates concise. You do not exaggerate stability, nor do you manufacture crisis. You report what is, not what might be. The king's replies, when they come weeks later, are often brief. He trusts your judgment. He does not need to micromanage. You have proven through repetition, through consistency, through quiet competence, that the kingdom does not fracture when he leaves. It simply continues, like a clock that has been wound properly. You close the final ledger, blot the last signature, and stack the papers with care. The chamber is quiet now, the ministers long departed, the rain still falling in its steady, unhurried rhythm. You rise, your joints stiff from sitting, your mind clear but not empty. You walk to the window, watching as the street lamps flicker to life along the palace drive. The city outside continues its own relentless pace, but here in this room you have carved out a space of predictability. You have managed the realm not with spectacle, but with schedule, not with force, but with follow-through. You have learned that leadership, at its core, is just a series of small, repeated choices made with attention and care. You extinguish the desk lamp, though the fire in the hearth still glows softly. You make your way to the door, your footsteps echoing faintly on the polished floor. The corridor beyond is dim, the palace settling into its evening rhythm. You have more to do before the day is done. A final check of the guard rotations, a quiet word with the steward, a moment of stillness before sleep. But you do not feel rushed. You do not feel burdened. You feel aligned. You have presided over the regency. You have kept the machinery running. You have used your position not to dominate, but to steady. And in a world that often confuses noise with authority, that is a quiet but profound achievement. You step out into the cool night air, letting the rain mist against your cheeks, feeling the weight of the crown settle comfortably on your brow. The kingdom is not perfect. It never will be, but it is held. It is watched. It is tended to day after day with the same quiet devotion you apply to your gardens, your books, children. You have learned that rule is not a performance. It is a practice. And as you make your way back to your chamber, the sound of the rain your only companion, you feel a deep, settling peace. Tomorrow will bring new ledgers, new petitions, new decisions to weigh and measure. But for tonight, you allow yourself to rest, knowing that the rhythm will continue, steady and sure, exactly as you have designed it. You feel the seasons turning, not just in the sky, but in the quiet rhythm of your own breath. The years have layered themselves upon you, like the sediment in the river, gradual and inevitable. You no longer rush to meet the day. You allow it to unfold, your footsteps slower, your gaze more observant. The court moves with its usual polyphonic hum, but you notice the spaces between the notes more clearly now. You sit by the window at Kensington, the morning light softer, the air carrying the faint, familiar scent of damp earth and old paper. Your hands, once steady with the quill, now rest lightly on a woolen blanket draped across your lap. You would probably drive a modern productivity coach to absolute distraction with your refusal to optimize every idle moment, but you know better. Efficiency is a poor substitute for presence. You do not mourn the passing of strength. You simply acknowledge the shift in its form. The final months are not marked by drama, but by accumulation. Letters arrive, their ink slightly faded, their words wrapping around you like distant echoes. Scholars still write to you, not expecting immediate replies, but hoping their thoughts will find a quiet resting place in your correspondence. You read them slowly, your eyes tracing the familiar curves of Latin phrases and French compliments. You do not draft long responses anymore. A single line of appreciation, carefully penned, is enough. You have learned that influence does not require volume. It lingers in the spaces you leave behind. The political landscape continues its endless churn. New ministers, shifting alliances, the quiet consolidation of a constitutional monarchy that will outlast empires. You watch it not with anxiety, but with the calm detachment of someone who helped plant the seeds and now trusts the soil to do the rest. There is a mainstream historical fact you carry with you into these quieter days. The concept of the enlightened sovereign was not born in royal palaces alone, but was actively cultivated by figures like you, who bridged the gap between academic philosophy and practical governance. Your patronage of the sciences, your defense of inoculation, your quiet insistence that rulers should read, think and question. These were not mere hobbies. They were architectural choices, laying the foundation for a British intellectual tradition that would prize empirical inquiry alongside moral duty. You do not need a plaque to know this. You feel it in the steady correspondence that still arrives, in the way young scholars reference your salons, in the quiet confidence with which the kingdom now approaches problems of state and science. You helped normalize the idea that a crown and a curious mind are not mutually exclusive, a notion that would quietly echo through centuries of British civic life. As your strength wanes, you request the carriage to take you slowly through the gardens you helped shape. The wheels roll over crushed gravel, the sound a soft, rhythmic percussion that matches your breathing. You watch the trees pass, oaks, beeches, weeping willows, their branches pruned and guided by hands that understood growth as a collaboration, not a conquest. You think about the landscapes of Richmond, of Kensington, of St. James's, all subtly altered by your preference for naturalistic design over rigid formality. You did not impose order upon nature, you invited nature to speak, then listened. The winding paths, the hidden grottos, the deliberate asymmetry of the plantings. All of it reflects a worldview that values adaptation over control, patience over force. You close your eyes, feeling the gentle sway of the carriage, the cool glass against your fingertips, the quiet satisfaction of a vision realized without fanfare. There is a quirky, almost fringe detail that surfaces during these final excursions, one that brings a faint smile to your lips. It is said that in the years before your passing, you kept a small, leather-bound notebook, filled not with state affairs or philosophical musings, but with sketches of garden layout, accompanied by marginal notes about the migratory patterns of swallows and the blooming cycles of night-blooming jasmine. You called it your calendar of quiet things. Modern historians have largely overlooked it, dismissing it as the hobby of an ailing queen. But those who have seen its pages recognize something profound. A mind still mapping the world, still seeking rhythm in the natural cycles long after the court's politics had grown tiresome. You kept it on your bedside table, opening it not to work but to wander. It reminds you that even as the body slows, the imagination can still travel, tracing the invisible lines that connect soil to sky, season to soul. Historians still argue whether Caroline's late-life influence was primarily cultural and intellectual, shaping the early British Enlightenment through patronage and correspondence, or whether her political legacy was quietly dismantled by subsequent ministers who preferred a more subdued royal presence. You sit with that question as the carriage comes to a gentle halt near the water's edge. You know the answer lies not in archives but in atmosphere. You feel it in the way Britain approaches governance, not with divine absolutism, but with measured debate, not with theatrical authority, but with institutional continuity. You helped shift the paradigm from the crown as a lightning rod to the crown as a compass. It was not a sudden revolution, it was a slow recalibration, achieved through decades of steady letters, careful inoculations, quiet regencies, and gardens designed for reflection rather than domination. You did not need to shout to be heard. You simply needed to remain consistent. The final days arrive without warning, though they have been anticipated for months. They do not come with panic, but with preparation. Your attendants move with familiar grace, adjusting cushions, dimming lamps, speaking in hushed, respectful tones. You do not fight the slowing of your pulse. You observe it, the way you once observed the tide or the turning of a season. The room is warm, the air still, the scent of beeswax and dried lavender lingering like a familiar promise. You think about the long arc of your life, the courtyard in Ansbach, the salons in Berlin, the voyage across the sea, the grottos in Richmond, the ledgers in St. James's. You do not see a series of disconnected events. You see a single continuous thread, woven with patience, curiosity, and quiet resolve. You have not conquered nations, but you have cultivated minds. You have not rewritten history, but you have softened its edges. And in a world that often mistakes volume for value, that is a rare and enduring kind of victory. You close your eyes, letting the rhythm of your breathing grow slower, deeper. The weight of the years lifts, not in a sudden rush, but in a gradual release, like a tide pulling back from the shore. You feel the cool linen against your skin, the soft murmur of the house settling around you, the distant sound of a garden gate closing in the evening air. There is no fear here, only a profound settling stillness. You have tended your plots, both literal and intellectual. You have watched them grow. You have stepped back to let the seasons take their course. And now you simply rest. Let your shoulders sink into the mattress now, feeling the heavy, comfortable weight of the day dissolve into the quiet dark. The gardens you tended will keep growing long after the sun has set, their roots reaching deep into the cool, forgiving earth, their leaves catching the soft morning light when you are no longer there to watch them. There is no rush to finish anything tonight, no urgent task waiting beyond the door, no heavy crown left unattended. The world has been spinning steadily through the centuries, carrying the quiet echoes of thoughtful minds, of patient rulers, of women who chose curiosity over noise and steadiness over spectacle. You can let that truth settle over you like a woolen blanket, warm and familiar, wrapping around your thoughts until they soften into simple, unformed dreams. Listen to the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, slow and even, matching the quiet cadence of a distant clock, a fading garden breeze, a river moving calmly toward the sea. Everything is exactly as it should be. You are safe, you are held, and the night will keep watch while you rest. Close your eyes, drift into the quiet dark, and let the gentle tide of sleep carry you home. End of script. Sweet dreams.